Chapter 365. First of all, a correction. The day before yesterday, it was B6. Yesterday, it became B4. I made a mistake. Thank you for your reminder. Hearing the news of the Ming family bidding, Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. It was as if he had not thought that the other party's response would come so quickly and with such shrewdness. In reality, his heart was still calm. This was something he had expected. The Ming family was not a pig waiting to be slaughtered. Although the matter had happened suddenly, someone as scheming and deep foresight as Ming Qingda would certainly have a better response. Eunuch Huang and Guojing heard this news and their spirits rose. Their long-sitting buttocks finally moved forward a little and listened with anticipation to the sounds in the courtyard. Only Xue Qing remained calm and collected as he tasted the tea in his bowl. This was already the fifth lot. It had never been one of the Ming family's goals, but they had chosen to bid at this time. Their goal was to stand out in this silent scene and suppress the arrogance of Xia Qifei and his group in room B4. More importantly, they were using a scoundrelly method to stall for time and slow down the process. Thus, this round of bidding seemed to be exceptionally boring, even boring. It was far less intense than the first round, when Xia Qifei and the Xiong clan of Lingnan clashed tit for tat, and it couldn't even compare to the previous rounds. The price the Ming family bid was very low. There was not a hint of sincerity to be seen. However, Ming Qingda did not care about this. With a face full of smiles, he watched his son and the shopkeepers of the clan drag out the time. This round of bidding took up a few quarters of an hour. When the Ming family calculated, they were as inexperienced as a beginner. When they called out a price, they were as shy as a virgin girl. When they handed over the leather bag, they were as inconvenient as a toothless old woman. In any case, they dragged it out as long as they could. From the master to the accounts room, they cooperated very well. It made everyone wait anxiously, but they could not find any problems. The transport company official responsible for announcing had already begun to stand on the stone steps and yawn. This fifth lot was not over yet. Xia Qifei's price had been suppressing the Ming family by a large margin, but the 3 rounds of bidding had not ended. No one could jump to the next round. The surrounding Jiangnan merchants began to chat and drink tea. These old foxes could all see what the old Ming master was planning. They knew that within today, they would probably only be able to open the 5th lot. The sun in the sky moved slowly but surely toward the west. The Ming family's speaking movements were slow and sloppy. A little bird landed in the middle of the courtyard and looked curiously at the people around it who were yawning and chatting. It did not seem to understand why everything in this courtyard seemed to be moving in slow motion. The Ming family was in no hurry. The Jiangnan merchants were in no hurry. Eunuch Huang and Guojing were in no hurry. Governor Xue Qing was even less anxious. He didn't know if the robbers in room B4 would go crazy when they encountered this kind of slow simmering skill. However, under everyone's careful scrutiny, Fan Xian hid the anxiety between his brows. His heart was clear, and he was full of praise for the Ming family's ruthless skills and shameless methods. The sun gradually descended toward the west, dragging the shadow of the palace treasury main door like a girl's dress. The little bird, which had not even found a blade of grass on the stone steps, raised its head and looked around. Full of hidden bitterness, it cooed a few times and flapped its wings to fly away. A gong rang out. The firecrackers that represented the successful end of the palace treasury bidding did not explode because the 3rd bidding for the 5th lot had just ended. Xia Qifei had once again arduously defeated the Ming family and obtained the right to sell glass in the north. At this moment, the first day of the palace treasury's New Year opening bidding was about to end. The merchants in the courtyard all let out a breath and stretched. They wiped away their cold sweat with some lingering fear. Fortunately, the Ming family had made a move in the end and forcefully dragged out the time. Otherwise, given the aura of room B4 at the beginning, who knew how many drops of soup would be left from the fat and overflowing 16 lots of the palace treasury? Eunuch Huang and Guozheng met each other's eyes and smiled gratifyingly. Xia Qifei's move had indeed surprised them. Fortunately, in the end, he had dragged out the other party's aura. Presumably, the Ming family would make proper arrangements for tomorrow's matters tonight. Fan Xian sat on the chair and lifted the stage over the high wall of the large courtyard. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the smear of red on the horizon, but he could no longer see the setting sun. The courtyard began to clear and seal the lots. The banknotes and tools that the merchants had brought in did not need to be taken out. For one, it was for convenience and another was for safety. Tonight, Jiangnan Road, the Overwatch Council, the transport company, and the Suzhou government would work together to guard this palace treasury courtyard tightly. It could be said to be the safest place in the world. The soldiers began to put seals on the rooms in the corridor and the outside of the flower hole. The merchants had already come out. They stood in the courtyard in groups of 3 to 5 and chatted. When they saw the old Ming master and young master Ming come out of room A1, everyone quickly went over to greet and bow. Everyone's voices were low, but the focus of their discussion was naturally the bandit in room B4. Xia Qifei's face was heavy. He led his subordinates to stand under the wall closest to the main door of the palace treasury courtyard. It was a patch of darkness. As everyone discussed, they looked in that direction. Looking at the group of people in the darkness, they thought of the bandits' methods earlier and felt a growing fear in their hearts. At this time, the 4 officials in the main hall also walked down. Greetings, Eunuch Huang. Greetings, Sir Shui. Sir Fan Jr., you have to leave some food for me. All of a sudden, the merchants rushed forward and surrounded the 4 high-ranking officials. They greeted each other and complained about their troubles. It was a very lively scene. Fan Xian couldn't resist smiling. Looking at the angry Xiong Bailing of the Lingnan Xiong family, he comforted him and then teased, "There are still 11 lots, what are you all in such a rush for?" The representatives of the various families cried out bitterly in their hearts. Of the remaining 11 lots, the Ming family was determined to win 8 of the bundled lots. How could they have any food for themselves? Fan Xian sighed again and said, "There are too few lots. There will always be people who won't get their turn. This is the rule of the court. I can't do anything about it." Hearing these words, everyone immediately thought of Fan Xian's initial suggestion. Hearing him mention the word rule, their eyes involuntarily lit up. Xiong Bailing suddenly chuckled and said in a low voice, "This rule, isn't it set by people?" These merchants had not fought for any benefits today, so they couldn't help but feel a certain thirst for tomorrow's lots. Ming Qingda, who had been watching coldly from outside the crowd, furrowed his brows. He knew the imperial envoy was secretly urging the merchants to fight for shares with the Ming family. He laughed coldly in his heart, but on the surface, he smiled faintly and glanced at Eunuch Huang without anyone noticing. Eunuch Huang understood and smiled slightly as he interrupted, "Everyone, I also think the same." Everyone couldn't help but feel happy. They thought that even the representative of the palace had agreed to the suggestion of dividing the lots. It looked like this matter would succeed. Unexpectedly, Eunuch Huang then sighed and said, "Unfortunately, the rules of the court are here. No one dares to move on their own. This matter can only wait until I return to the capital and go to the Empress Dowager and the Emperor to argue for everyone. I dare say that next year will certainly be better than this year." Everyone paused. Their faces were very awkward, but in their hearts, they were cursing this eunuch for only saying pretty words. During this time, Fan Xian was talking to everyone, but in reality, his attention was on the Ming family. He found that the old Ming master's state of mind was still clear despite the sudden change. His emotions did not seem to have been affected at all. His judgment of matters was still fast and accurate. He couldn't help but feel a little worried. Since he wanted to force the Ming family to lose their heads, it looked like he would have to add more bargaining chips. All of the work of sealing the treasury had finally ended, and the defenses had been set up. The main doors of the palace treasury courtyard were slowly pulled open for the second time that day. The fresh air from the street poured into the courtyard and lifted everyone's spirits. They decided to go back at night to discuss things and come back tomorrow to fight for the lots. It had already come to this. Who cared if it was the Ming family or the Fan family? They had to steal some business to do. At this time, the large merchants had already heard from Fan Xian's few words the intentions of a certain faction in the court. They wanted to target the Ming family. There were benefits to lure them and power to guide them. The merchants began to drool over the Ming family that they had not dared to directly clash with. The leaders of the large families, led by the Lingnan Xiong family and the Chuanzhou Sun family, met each other's eyes and smiled strangely. Amidst their laughter, they decided to eat together at Jiangnan restaurant that night. Everyone was secretly discussing how to steal the Ming family's lot. Of course, they were paying attention to the movements of the old Ming master. They found that the old Ming master was talking to the imperial envoy. One old and one young, the two of them had smiles on their faces and were incomparably intimate. Officials and merchants were actually both extremely hypocritical professions. Naturally, they would do this kind of superficial work, so no one was surprised. Just as they were about to leave, they saw the imperial envoy gently wave his hand and call over Xia Qifei and his group, who had remained in the shadows. The merchants all stopped their steps and looked curiously at the scene in front of them. Fan Xian's expression was calm as he gazed at Xia Qifei with a faint smile. His two hands were in front of his body and made a gesture that only the two of them understood. His mouth said, "Sir Xia, today you are in the limelight." Xia Qifei smiled and raised his hands in a greeting in all directions. It is all thanks to everyone's modesty. No matter how much the merchants hated him, they knew that he was, after all, a figure in the underworld. It was best not to offend him face to face. Furthermore, they could clearly see that this person was Imperial Envoy Fan Xian's trusted aide. Thus, they kept their faces and replied with a few words, saying that Sir Xia had not made a name for himself for 10 years and had shocked the world with a single brilliant feat. Ming Qingda narrowed his eyes and looked at the enemy who had suddenly appeared in front of him. He suddenly opened his mouth and asked, "Master Xia, why are you suddenly interested in doing business?" The scene became silent. Xia Qifei lowered his head and only slowly raised it a moment later. Looking at the master of this generation of the Ming family, he said with a not quite there smile, "Although I have been on the Jianghu for a long time, my family has been in business for generations. When it comes to my generation, no matter how bad it is, I have to carry on my father's dying wish." Oh. The corners of Ming Qingda's eyes furrowed even more. He tiredly asked, "So, Master Xia is also a family of merchants? I didn't know you were a merchant from all over the world. Perhaps I once had a friendship with your father." All the merchants looked at this scene with curiosity. Hearing this conversation, they were also very curious about what Xia Qifei's family originally did. Xia Qifei gazed calmly at Ming Qingda's face that often appeared in his nightmares. An unknown emotion welled up in his heart. A moment later, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He quietly said, "Of course, there is friendship. My father is your father. Does Master Ming not know him?" The people present did not quite understand these words. Xiong Bailing began to unconsciously dig at his ears. Ming Qingda was slightly startled. He looked at Xia Qifei in front of him and did not speak. Although Xia Qifei didn't know why the imperial envoy wanted him to reveal his identity ahead of time, standing once again in front of the Ming family had been his strongest wish these years. Today, his dream had come true. It made his emotions surge with emotion. However, he still maintained his calm on the surface. It was just that his right hand, hanging by his side and hidden in his sleeve, was trembling slightly. He gazed at Ming Qingda and said in a light but faint voice, "Big brother, we haven't seen each other for a dozen years. Do you not recognize Xiao Qi?" Xia Qifei was the seventh young master of the Ming family. He was the rumored seventh young master who should have inherited the Ming family business but had mysteriously disappeared in the end. All the merchants present looked at Xia Qifei in disbelief. It was as if they were looking at a fierce ghost crawling out of hell, a monster that should not exist in this world. How was this possible? Although no one dared to discuss it, everyone could guess that it was the old matriarch of the Ming family and the old Ming master in front of them who had killed the seventh young master. How could he still be alive and become the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits? Ming Qingda gazed in a daze at Xia Qifei in front of him. He stared at that face for an indeterminable amount of time. Suddenly, his body began to tremble. He finally saw a trace of a familiar shadow on this face. It was that young and inexperienced little brother from back then, that thin body that had been viciously beaten by him with a whip, and that face filled with hatred and the joy of revenge. Father. At this moment, Ming Launcher's heart was also filled with incomparable shock and fear. He looked like an idiot at Xia Qifei, the legendary uncle. He found that his father's body was already swaying and quickly went to support him. In Ming Launcher's view, this palace treasury courtyard was like a haunted house. He could not stay for long. Supporting his father, who seemed to have aged a great deal in an instant, he led the members of the clan out of the palace treasury courtyard. The merchants present were still staring at Xia Qifei with faces full of shock and quietly discussing something. When the Ming family walked to the front door, unexpectedly, the master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, abruptly shook off his son's support and forced himself to stand straight, turning around. The master of the Ming family's face was slightly pale, but he used his powerful self-control to recover his temporary calm. He gazed at Xia Qifei in the courtyard and calmly said, "Master Xia must be joking. My poor seventh brother unfortunately died of illness a dozen years ago. Please do not say such a joke to provoke my heart." The merchants were silent. They knew it was fortunate that the old master of the Ming family had stopped and turned around to say these words. Otherwise, if, in their shock, they had revealed an opening and allowed this news to spread without anyone from the Ming family to refute it, the situation would become even more difficult to control. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and looked at the old and tired master of the Ming family on the stone steps. He sighed in his heart and said, "What a pity, I admire you." To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 366. After the 25th, the monthly tickets will be doubled. Brothers and sisters who still have tickets, help me keep some. When the time comes, smash them. Thank you here, and then go eat. I wish everyone a happy weekend. Eat oysters at night, ah. For Fan Xian, it was a pity that Ming Qingda did not lose his composure in the face of the sudden attack he had hidden for a long time. His admiration was for the same reason. Xia Qifei's true past was definitely one of the most secretive matters in the world. The Ming family had no idea that the seventh young master was still alive in this world. After he had been saved by the old master of the Jiangnan water bandits, he had become the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits. The Ming family even had some business dealings with the Jiangnan water bandits. If Ming Qingda had known of Xia Qifei's identity earlier, he would probably have long thought of a way to deal with him. Facing the seventh young master who had appeared like a ghost, the current master of the Ming family was only slightly startled. At least he recovered his calm on the surface. No wonder he was the wealthiest man in the Qing kingdom, the head of a large Jiangnan family. Although the Ming family had deep connections in Jingdou, it was impossible for them to know this. Even Fan Xian had only begun to focus his research on the Ming family after he had drawn up this year's plan last autumn. Only then did he find a sliver of a crack he could use in the iron plate that was Jiangnan. Of course, this was all thanks to the current head of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, Yan Bingyun, and Sir Yan Jr.'s ability to summarize, analyze, and meticulously track down information. It was this normally quiet high-ranking official of the Overwatch Council who had successfully dug out Xia Qifei's most secretive past. If Yan Bingyun had not helped Fan Xian take care of his foundation beforehand, Fan Xian's trip to Jiangnan this time would not have been so relaxed and confident. The group of people from the Ming family suppressed the shock in their hearts and silently left the door of the palace treasury manor. They walked out of the street that had been sealed off by soldiers. A carriage had long since come up to receive them and drove toward Ming Garden outside the city. No one knew how chaotic Ming Garden would be tonight because of the news of the 7th young master's sudden resurrection, or how the Ming family would respond. Fan Xian stood at the door of the manor and watched with a slight smile as the Ming family's carriage disappeared into the dusk. Seeing this, the officials behind him and the Jiangnan merchants couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. They felt that the slight smile on the corners of the imperial envoy's lips was incomparably cold and cold-blooded. Everyone couldn't resist glancing at Xia Qifei a few more times. It was as if they still could not connect the head bandit of the Jiangnan water bandits with the 7th young master that the Ming family had thought dead many years ago. They knew that with the imperial envoy as a backer and the legendary wolf from back then, there would be a fight over the Ming family's enormous fortune. Although the Ming family could completely deny it, the matter would eventually become intense. What kind of benefits could the Jiangnan merchants gain from this? Xiong Beiling of Lingnan and Sun Jixiang of Quanzhou looked at each other. They were both thinking, for tonight's gathering at Jiangnan restaurant, should they invite another person? However, today's cards had been flipped too suddenly. The Jiangnan merchants could not make up their minds for a moment. Furthermore, to extend a hand to Xia Qifei at this time would be too rash. Besides, they didn't know what this 7th Master Xia was thinking. Fan Xian did not know what Xia Qifei was thinking. He only knew that in the action manual that Yan Bingyun had drawn up for him, the Jiangnan trip should be split into 2 groups. Attacking the Ming family, then the other merchants had to be appeased. Xia Qifei had taken so many bids today and was already faintly forcing the Jiangnan merchants to unite and begin fighting for food with the Ming family tomorrow. Once Xia Qifei's identity, which could not be verified, was revealed, the Jiangnan merchants should be able to smell the conspiracy and opportunity within. Danger and opportunity had always been a pair. Merchants had an innate sense of adventure. Thus, Fan Xian gave Xia Qifei a hand signal. He saw Xia Qifei walk in front of Xiong Beiling and Sun Jixiang with a face full of smiles. Under their startled gazes, he quietly said a few words. The merchants all laughed lightly as if they were talking about a very interesting topic. Then, everyone dispersed and left the street. Fan Xian turned around and said a few words to Xueqing and Eunuch Huang. He glanced at Guozhang and then left first under the protection of the tiger guards. As he left, he turned his head back and swept a glance out of the corner of his eye. He saw that although Xia Qifei did not leave in the same direction as the merchants, he knew that there would be a chair for Xia Qifei at the Jiangnan gathering in a moment. The Ming family was at a disadvantage. The Ming family was being furiously attacked by Fan Xian. However, as representatives of the Ming family's backing, Eunuch Huang and Guozhang did not seem to be excited or concerned. The two of them smiled slightly and bowed to Governor Xueqing and quietly said a few words. Xueqing furrowed his brows slightly and shook his head. He put his hands behind his back and climbed into his sedan chair to leave. At this moment, Only eunuch Huang and imperial censor Guozheng remained in front of the large courtyard. They watched with narrowed eyes as the Jiangnan governor's sedan chair gradually turned the corner. Their expressions immediately became ugly. Guozheng coldly said, "This governor does things too carefully. What is there to be afraid of in a joint petition?" Eunuch Huang chuckled and said, "Sir Guo, how many people in this world can shoulder righteousness like you? Last year, in the Great Hall of the Ministry of Justice, you did not fear the nobility and interrogated Fan Xian. The palace greatly admired this matter." Guozheng laughed self-mockingly and said, "Don't mention that matter." Eunuch Huang calmed down and said in a quiet voice, "Xueqing has always been deeply trusted by the emperor. In officialdom, this person is the most slick and difficult to fathom. This time, Fan Xian secretly sent Xia Qifei out to seize the bid. You are the imperial censor, you can write rumors, but, after all, there is no way to hold on to solid evidence. Xueqing will certainly not participate in this. My question earlier was just to test his attitude. You also know that the place we are looking at is not in Jiangnan." Guozheng smiled slightly and replied, "Naturally, officials are not allowed to do business. This rule has been set by the court for many years. Which official has actually followed it? Even if Xia Qifei is Fan Xian's pawn, if we grab solid evidence and bring it to the court, I'm afraid the emperor will just laugh it off and not care about it in the past few years. Now that Fan Xian is heavily favored by the emperor, there will be even less of a problem." The two of them met each other's eyes again. Guozheng continued to smile and said, "The Jiangnan matter will eventually end in Jingdou. Eunuch, where do you think Fan Xian got so much silver? Although we can't find out how the silver came to Jiangnan, we can at least find out if the room that should have been filled with silver has been emptied out by the Fan family at this time." Eunuch Huang chuckled darkly and said, "Those masters in the palace were thinking this way. Let the imperial envoy do as he pleases in Jiangnan. In a few days, the capital will probably start investigating the Ministry of Revenue." Fan Xian stood in Hua Garden's study with his body leaning forward. He looked at the little hand on the desk holding a brush and writing seriously. Among such an old child, the third prince's handwriting could be considered pretty good. It was graceful but not gentle. The structure was strong but round on the outside. It was contained but not revealed, strong but not released. Judging a person by his handwriting, Fan Xian knew that this prince, who always liked to wear a shy smile on his face, was not a simple character. However, he was still young and there were many things he could not see clearly. Other than dealing with Jiangnan matters, Fan Xian's most important job was to fulfill his duty as the Imperial College's Sai and be responsible for the third prince's studies and cultivation. As for the third prince's studies, a few days ago, Xueqing had kindly invited a famous Jiangnan teacher to come and teach the third prince. In the end, he had been kicked out of the door by the third prince. After Fan Xian returned to Suzhou and heard of this matter, he flew into a rage and led the third prince to personally go to the Jiangnan Academy to apologize to the teachers. With kind words, he invited the teachers back into Hua Garden. He then locked the third prince in his study and viciously slapped his palms a few times. When the ruler landed on the palm, the sound was crisp. Particularly when it landed on the third prince's palm, the ruler felt even more arrogant and proud. By the time Xueqing heard of this matter and rushed over, the slap had already been finished. The governor looked at the third prince, whose eyes were red but was still obedient, and couldn't help his heart being shocked. Although Fan Xian was the prince's teacher that the emperor had personally appointed to actually hit him, this Sir Fan Jr. was indeed extraordinarily daring. After this matter was announced, the Jiangnan scholars all praised the imperial envoy as indeed the light of scholars. To be so respectful to his teacher, Fan Xian's already good reputation became even more beautiful. What everyone didn't know was that Fan Xian teaching the third prince had nothing to do with the emperor. It was purely because he didn't want to fail Yi Guipin's solemn request. "Your Highness, it's almost done," Fan Xian said in a gentle voice as he gazed at the third prince, who was bent over the table and writing seriously. "Teacher, there are still 2 more pages." The third prince turned his head in astonishment. It was as if he had not expected Fan Xian to be so gentle today. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Your palm still hurts, right? You can make it up tomorrow. Rest a bit today and go out to play." He rubbed the third prince's head. This action appeared a bit too intimate. Even if he was a teacher, logically speaking, he should be sitting upright and serious. Yet, the third prince liked this. Perhaps the children who grew up in the palace all had some contact deficiency, whether it was physically or mentally. The little guy smiled and bowed. He then ran out of the room. He ran so fast that no one knew what fun things were waiting for him in Ming Garden. Watching the third prince's departing figure, for some reason, Fan Xian's heart felt a bit empty. He began to miss his brother far away in Shangjing in northern Qi. Wang Qinian had written to say that Xixia had recently been busy, with the help of the Overwatch Council, consolidating the Cui family's routes in the north. However, it was impossible for a 7th leaf to leave the country. It was indeed difficult for a young man like him to manage such an important matter. As for why the third prince had left so excitedly, Fan Xian understood the reason. It was because he had the third prince pester Haitang these few days. Given the prince's status, if he wanted to enter the Tianyi Dao sect, presumably he would not be too opposed. Even if this matter was not handled properly in the future, it would be beneficial for the third prince to learn some martial arts from Haitang to protect himself and forcefully put together a master-disciple relationship. A knocking sound came from outside the study. Fan Xian woke up from his thoughts and raised his head to look. He saw Shi Chan standing with his head turned to look into the garden. His fingers were unconsciously knocking on the door. He couldn't resist smiling and said, "Come in, what's there to see?" Shi Chanli forced a smile and walked in through the door. "Teacher, to have the third prince learn martial arts from Haitang is truly something only you would dare to do. She is, after all, the saint girl of northern Qi. If this matter gets out to the capital, I'm afraid it will cause a great deal of trouble." "What trouble?" Fan Xian smiled. "The emperor told me to take the third prince to Jiangnan. Of course, I have to teach him with all my heart. As for things like martial arts, Haitang is more suitable than me." The two of them no longer discussed this topic. Shi Chanli said with a pained expression, "Today, Yang Jimei came again and insisted on inviting me to dinner." Yang Jimei was the largest salt merchant in the area between the 2 rivers. The Hua garden that Fan Xian lived in had been given to him by this salt merchant. Fan Xian knew that this salt merchant was close to Shuiqing, so he always gave him some face. Hearing Shi Chanli say this, he knew that although Yang Jimei had not earned much this year, he had great hopes for the palace treasury next year. He smiled and said, "This garden is his family's. If he wants to come and see, of course, we can't refuse. He knows that he can't curry favor with me, so he can only curry favor with you. Let him eat. In the future, you will also be doing business in Jiangnan. It will always be good to know a few local tyrants." "Where is he preparing to invite you?" Fan Xian asked. "Jiangnan Restaurant." The highest class restaurants in Suzhou were Jiangnan Restaurant and Zhuyuan Restaurant. When Fan Xian had first arrived in Suzhou, the Jiangnan officials led by Shuiqing had chosen Jiangnan Restaurant to welcome him. Presently, the Ming family's Zhuyuan Restaurant had been half bought and half scared into the hands of the third prince and was prepared to be turned into a branch of the Baoyue brothel. If Yang Jimei wanted to invite someone, it could only be at Jiangnan Restaurant. Fan Xian thought to himself that his question was indeed unnecessary. He thought for a moment and then said, "Today, the Jiangnan merchants have also decided to meet at Jiangnan Restaurant, the Ming family has to deal with the matter of Xia Qifei, so they probably won't send anyone to attend. Yang Jimei insisted on inviting you to dinner. He certainly wants to use this opportunity to build connections with the royal merchants. Give this opportunity to Yang Jimei. When the time comes, bring him to the banquet. Presently, everyone in Suzhou knew that the head shopkeeper of the Baoyue brothel branch, Shi Chanli, was actually Fan Xian's confidant. With Shi Chanli acting as a middleman, the royal merchants would certainly be happy to accept Yang Jimei's arrival. Of course, Fan Xian's thoughts were not just to return a favor to Yang Jimei and Shui Qing. He also had other arrangements. At the banquet, keep your ears open, Fan Xian said. The Ming family is not present, so the royal merchants will not avoid you. Perhaps they will purposely use your ears to send their plans for tomorrow to me. Shi Chanli nodded. In reality, he was still a bit nervous. Should I keep an eye on Xia Qifei? After staying with Fan Xian for a long time, Shi Chanli, who usually only knew how to study the books of the saints, had also become used to viewing everything in the world through the eyes of a conspiracy theory. These words clearly showed that he did not trust Xia Qifei. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Relax, Xia Qifei is a smart person. He won't be stupid enough to betray me at this time. This will not benefit him at all." Shi Chanli smiled with slight embarrassment and then asked, "Sir, do you have any words that you want me to bring to the Jiangnan royal merchants?" Fan Xian lowered his head and thought for a moment. "Just say that I support them to do as they please. Even if they completely empty out this year, I will compensate them next year." He raised his head and warned, "Of course, you have to dress up your words a bit. Don't say it too plainly." Shi Chanli accepted the order and was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something Yang Jimei had mysteriously mentioned earlier. After thinking for a bit, he still opened his mouth and said, "Earlier, Yang Jimei said that there is an organization in Jiangnan called the Juanshan Conference. Its power is somewhat mysterious and unfathomable. Please be careful, sir." Fan Xian thought for a bit and felt that the name Juanshan Conference was unfamiliar. It seemed that there was no record of it in the Overwatch Council's files. He furrowed his brows and said, "Mysterious does not necessarily mean powerful." "I understand." After Shi Chanli left, Fan Xian's brows furrowed even tighter. An organization that even he didn't know about, what exactly did it represent? He called out. Gauda, who had been standing guard outside the door, walked in with large steps. Nowadays, Fan Xian was doing things less and less without avoiding him. One reason was to purposely use the tiger guards to show sincerity to the person on the dragon chair in the capital. The other reason was to try the words "moving people with emotion" and see if it was possible to truly turn these powerful tiger guards into truly one of us. He had vowed to call over the head swordsman of the 6th Bureau. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said to the subordinate, "How many people are there in Suzhou?" He was asking about the number of assassins and swordsmen of the 6th Bureau. The emperor had only moved a few tiger guards over. They either stayed by Fan Xian's side or stayed behind the third prince. They could not be moved. Most of the assassins of the 6th Bureau were under the Shadow's lead. They were all over Jiangnan fighting guerrilla warfare against the group of aces sent by Dongyi. For a time, the number of people Fan Xian could move became somewhat inconvenient. The 6th Bureau still has 7 people. There are quite a few people from the 4th Bureau of Inspection stationed in Suzhou, the subordinate replied in a low voice. Presently, the head of the Qinian unit, Wang Qinian, was in northern Qi, Deng Ziyu was in Jingdou, and Su Wenmao had been left behind by Fan Xian in the 3 workshops of the palace treasury in North Min. Thus, this person was currently Fan Xian's most direct subordinate. Coincidentally, he had also come from the 6th Bureau, so he was the person in the Qinian unit most skilled in defense. "Don't move the people of the 4th Bureau," Fan Xian sighed and said. They are not good at fighting and killing. If there are any losses and Yan Bingyun knows that I used his people indiscriminately, given his personality, I really don't know how he will react. After I return to the capital, I will be criticized. Gao De and the member of the Qinian unit, who were listening to the side, both laughed. The subordinate asked with confusion, Sir, what are we doing today? To protect someone, Fan Xian said in a low voice. Fan Xian said in a heavy voice, take the 7 swordsmen of the 6th Bureau and hurry to Jiangnan restaurant. Find Xia Qifei and tell him directly that these are the guards I gave him. At the same time, tell him not to be suspicious. Once the palace treasury bidding is over, I will immediately take them back. No one knew whether or not Fan Xian had placed spies by Xia Qifei's side. At least on the surface, other than a few old officials of the Ministry of Revenue, the Overwatch Council did not monitor Xia Qifei's every move. This was the way the two sides interacted. Thus, Fan Xian had decided to move people to Xia Qifei's side. He had to at least give a word or two of explanation. The subordinate furrowed his brows and said, Sir, if they are all moved over, what about you and the third prince? Fan Xian glanced at Gao De and smiled confidently. Naturally, Sir Gao will worry about my safety. Your mission is to ensure that before the palace treasury bidding, Xia Qifei himself is not harmed in the slightest. Hearing these words, Gao De gripped the hilt of his knife and bowed. The subordinate did not continue to ask questions. He calmly accepted the order and prepared to open the door to make arrangements. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and suddenly said, Be careful. The old matriarch of the Ming family seemed to be in a very bad mood. She didn't even take a sip of her daily nourishing pigeon soup. She sent it back to the little kitchen untouched. After the Ming master and young master returned from Suzhou, they went straight into the back garden and had not come out. The uncles and nephews of each branch also received their orders. With faces full of worry, they passed through the beautiful corridors and pavilions by the lake in Ming Garden and hurried toward the old matriarch's courtyard. The servant girls with heads full of confusion watched as the 4th master, who only liked to walk his bird, the 3rd master, who only liked to take concubines, and the 6th master, who only liked to practice wrestling with martial artists and win lotteries. They walked hurriedly and with unsure expressions. It was usually difficult for the men of the Ming family to gather together. At this time, they had all arrived. They couldn't help but be confused. What had happened? For a moment, the entire Ming garden was enveloped in a tense and uneasy atmosphere. The speed at which rumors spread was always faster than the mail system that the Qing kingdom was so proud of. Before long, all of the servants in Ming Garden learned of a startling piece of news. It turned out that at the palace treasury bidding in Suzhou, an enemy who dared to oppose the Ming family had suddenly appeared. That enemy was the legendary 7th young master of the Ming family who had died many years ago. Back then, the previous master of the Ming family had loved the 7th young master's mother the most. In his will, it seemed that most of the property had been left to the 7th young master with a wretched fate. However, after all these years, the Ming family had long become the property of the eldest branch. Now that such a person had suddenly appeared, what exactly would happen? Everyone, calm down. The wrinkled old matriarch looked coldly at the men of the Ming family in the hall. A great anger surged in her heart. These men were so flustered at such a small matter. After 100 years, how could she peacefully hand over such a large family property to them? Sister, with such a rumor suddenly appearing, it's no wonder the children are panicking. Sitting beside the old Ming matriarch was the old master's concubine. Because she had fawned over the main wife well, she had lived until today. She looked at the old Ming matriarch's face and said in a trembling voice, if that Xia person is really Shao Qi, what do we do? To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 367. This chapter was difficult to write, so it was later. Tomorrow's chapter would probably be even more difficult, so the update would also be slightly later. Since you know it's just a rumor, then what is there to panic about? The old Ming matriarch screamed angrily. The old woman's voice had become sharp because of a strange sense of humiliation. It was as terrifying as the tip of a knife scratching across a piece of porcelain. The great aunt sitting by her side was scared stiff. She quickly and obediently sat back in her chair, not daring to say another word. The old Ming matriarch was easily jealous and ruthless. Back then, the old Ming master had only taken 3 concubines. Of the people of that generation, there were only 2 women left. Fortunately, the Ming family had a thriving male population. Not counting Xia Qifei, who was currently drinking in Jiangnan restaurant, there were a total of 6 men in the 2 branches with children. Ming Qingda was the eldest son of the eldest branch and the current master of the Ming family. The 3rd and 4th brothers were both born of this great aunt. Seeing their birth mother being yelled at by the old matriarch, these 2 did not feel very comfortable in their hearts. However, the old matriarch had accumulated power for a long time, so no one dared to argue. As the eldest son, Ming Qingda had to come out and say a few warm words of explanation in this situation. Unexpectedly, the old Ming matriarch did not even pay attention to this nominal master of the Ming family. With a cold face, she said, "Remember all of this. The 7th of the Ming family died a dozen years ago. As for the current master Xia in Suzhou, if he wants to use the rumor from a dozen years ago to cause trouble, the Ming family will not tolerate him." Ming Qingda had been rebuffed, but he still wore a smile on his face. Warmly, he said, "Mother, naturally, no one will believe such an absurd rumor. However, what if the court wants to believe it?" These words were spoken very directly. Xia Qifei was Fan Xian's pawn. If the court power Fan Xian represented wanted to use this opportunity to take over the Ming family's enormous property and power without bloodshed, this kind of situation would be the most dangerous. The old matriarch blinked her slightly muddy eyes and said with disgust, "Just because that Fan official says so. Does the court not listen to reason?" Ming Qingda thought to himself, when has the court ever been reasonable? However, in the past, the court had always stood on the side of the Ming family. Thus, the Ming family of all reason and the hardest fist had always been the Ming family. If there was a disagreement within the court, the Ming family's fist had already endured the pain and cut itself off. This reasoning was probably even more difficult to explain. He smiled bitterly and said, "Mother, please tell me." Xia Qifei's momentum was ferocious. Looking at the appearance of the bidding today, he had brought a lot of money. Furthermore, he had the support of the imperial envoy. As for how the Ming family would respond, it would require the old Ming matriarch to draw up a plan. She did not directly answer Ming Qingda's question. She only stared at the Ming family disciples in the yard and said in a cold voice, "The situation today is not the same as in the past. A few days ago, I had Lan Shi go to each branch to see you uncles and have you be more well-behaved. Today, I will repeat it again. At this time, do not bring any trouble to the Ming family. If you want to walk your birds, then walk them at home. Chase all those hooligans who only know how to wrestle out of the garden. Also, no one is allowed to spread this matter. If I hear anyone gossiping behind my back, be careful that I don't pull your tongues out." The old Ming matriarch's words were hurried and angry. She actually began to cough. The serving girl behind her quickly gave her a gentle pat on the back. Beside her, Zhang Sun Ming launched her quickly and respectfully handed over a bowl of tea. The Ming family disciples in the yard all bowed down, not daring to disobey the old matriarch's orders. Ming Qingda glanced at his mother. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. The old Ming matriarch laughed coldly in her heart. When her son did things, he lacked decisiveness. She always had to be the bad guy. She took a shallow sip of tea and indifferently opened her mouth to say, "Tomorrow is the second day of the bidding. As you all know, the imperial envoy is targeting our family. The next 8 lots will be bundled into 2 batches. It looks like the price will be much higher than in previous years. There is only one night. If we go to the money house now to issue the tickets, I'm afraid it will already be too late. At this time, you brothers should go back and gather up the private money in your rooms and hand it over to the accounts in a bit." Once these words came out, the men of the Ming family in the yard were immediately dumbfounded. Not being allowed to walk their birds and wrestle was just a temporary boredom. Anyone could endure it, but why did they have to use their pitifully small private money to travel to and fro? Every year when the palace treasury opened the bids, the family would always prepare enough silver. If the prices of those 8 lots were ridiculously high, then they could just not fight. Why was there a need to work so hard? The court would not set an upper limit. Who would know how much silver had to be stuffed in? These men were born with a golden spoon in their mouths, but they did not have the right to inherit. They only knew how to enjoy life. How could they know the true meaning of the palace treasury bidding for the Ming family? Behind it was hidden the power struggle within the court. Hearing the old matriarch's words, they unconsciously did not want to agree. The 6th master of the Ming family was younger and liked to wrestle, so he was braver. Gathering his courage, he said, "Mother, us brothers have never been able to participate in the family business. We all live on a monthly basis and each have a large family to support. Even if we have some private money, if we use that pitiful amount of silver to fill in, I'm afraid it won't be of much use." It would be better. Before he finished speaking, a teacup had already been smashed to pieces in front of him with a crisp sound. The 6th master jumped in fright and his body trembled. Looking at the old matriarch's expression, he was so frightened that his legs weakened and he knelt down. The old matriarch looked at him faintly and coldly and said, "Pitiful silver. Do you think I don't know how much you've gained from the public business these years? Your in-laws are all famous rich people in Suzhou. Before, I pretended I didn't see it because you are, after all, the flesh and blood of the Ming family. According to the ancestors' rules, you are not allowed to take over the family business. Seeing that you are pitiful, it is fine to gain some silver, but what is the situation now? All of you kneel and listen to me." After these words came out, everyone, including Ming Qingda, knelt in front of the 2 armchairs. The old matriarch's voice was like a venomous snake's tongue, making one shiver even though it was not cold. "If the big tree collapses, will it be any good for you monkeys? I will say it clearly. If the bidding tomorrow is not successful, even if the Ming family can hold out for a few more years, in the end, we will only be reduced to scattered ashes. At this time, we cannot be allowed to retreat. We can only advance. At this juncture, don't even think about hiding." The great aunt looked with heartache at her son in the court. She leaned over and comforted, "Sister, don't be angry, they know what to do." The men of the Ming family in the court were frightened. They pounded their heads like garlic and repeatedly admitted their wrongs. "It's good that you know your wrongs." The old Ming matriarch slowly leaned back in the chair. Her eyelids seemed to close slightly as she said, "In a moment, you will all go back. No matter what method you use, before dawn tomorrow, hand over the silver to the accounts room. Each room 200,000 liang, old 150,000 liang." After these words came out, the 2nd, 4th, and 5th princes did not have any objections. Although they still felt heartache, the 3rd prince was not going to let it go. He straightened his neck and said, "Mother, why does old Six only have to pay 150,000 liang?" The old matriarch glared at him and said, "Old Six is the youngest. These 2 years, he has been in contact with the garrison. He likes to wrestle and spends more silver. As the older brother, why are you fussing with him?" The third prince snorted heavily from his nose and said unhappily, "Have I never spent silver on a daily basis?" In reality, everyone knew that this was the old matriarch feeling bad for her youngest son. However, anyone could say this except for the third prince, because he was the great-aunt's own son. The great-aunt saw that the situation was not good and repeatedly signaled to the third prince with her eyes. Recently, the third prince's silver had not been easy to use, so he stubbornly refused to lower his head. The old matriarch flew into a rage and scolded, "You only know how to spend silver in the brothel and even buy those whores back home. Is there any reason to spend this silver?" From the wretched experience of Xia Qifei and his mother, it could be seen that the old matriarch had a very persistent dislike for some of the hobbies of men. "What about Big Brother? I am the eldest wife." Ming Qingda knelt on the ground and looked at his brothers with a slight smile. "Naturally, I have to put in a bit more effort. I accept 500,000 liang." Hearing the eldest brother say this, the brothers could not say anything more. The Ming garden family gathering immediately dispersed. The brothers quickly left the garden to gather the silver. Although they did indeed have a lot of private money hidden away, to gather this amount in one night was indeed very difficult. As the third prince of the Ming family followed his brothers outside, he cried about being poor and hoped that his brothers could help. At this time, everyone had their hands full. Furthermore, in front of the old Ming matriarch's strict orders, no one dared to be careless. How could they care about him? Time is too tight. At this time, the great-aunt had also returned to her own courtyard. In the old matriarch's courtyard, there was only one branch of the eldest wife. Ming Qingda furrowed his brows slightly and said, "The imperial envoy's move was too sudden. It didn't give us much time to react." The old Ming matriarch glanced at her son and sighed. "Today, in the palace treasury manor, your reaction was not bad. At least, you managed to buy one more night of time." Ming Qingda smiled bitterly and shook his head. "One night is too short. Furthermore, looking at Xia Qifei's actions today, I'm afraid he still has a lot of strength left. The battle tomorrow will probably be very dangerous. Even if the brothers can gather enough silver, it will only be an extra 1 million liang. Perhaps it still won't be enough." To the side, Ming Launcher was flabbergasted and said with self-doubt, "Father, in the past 8 lots, 40% of the fixed silver was a share of 5 million liang. This year, we had already prepared an extra 20%. In addition to the 1 million liang that the uncles raised, is it still not enough?" Ming Qingda smiled bitterly and said, "The biggest problem is that the imperial envoy knows that we have to win these 8 lots, so Xia Qifei can randomly call out prices. Furthermore, production and sales are all internal matters, so they can do it at a loss." Ming Launcher sighed. He was a smart person. He would not ask why the Ming family had to win these lots. Putting aside the so-called power problem, Dongyi alone would demand that they win all 8 lots. Otherwise, the price that Dongyi had to pay for the palace treasury's production each year would probably far exceed a few million liang. "Is there any news from Taiping Money House?" The old Ming matriarch, who had been silent for a while, suddenly opened her mouth and asked. Ming Qingda calmly replied, "They also did not expect it to be like this and did not prepare enough. Xia Qifei's silver was all transferred out from Taiping Money House. Presently, they can only give us promissory notes, but they can't issue cash notes. Tomorrow, we must have cash notes. As you know, they also have their fears. Earlier, their shopkeeper had already sent word. At most, he can give me another 300,000 liang. The old Ming matriarch understood why this was so. Once a money house's banknote contract was issued, it had to be honored. Xia Qifei had already issued a large amount of banknotes. Correspondingly, there were very few that dared to issue more. The money house had to guarantee that there would be cash to pay. This matter concerned the most important problem of the money house's reputation. Of course, given the relationship between Dong Yi and the Ming family, if it was not under such a tense situation, Taiping Money House could completely issue fake banknotes. However, the risk was too great, and this method was too crude. Once they offended Fan Xian, the Palace Treasury Transport Company could use the Xia family's banknotes and the Ming family's banknotes to play the most shameless move of making a run. So much silver, even if Taiping Money House was an immortal, they would not be able to move it to Suzhou in such a short amount of time. If they did, Taiping Money House could be considered destroyed. Although Taiping Money House had close economic ties to each country, normally speaking, no country's internal palace would do such a ruthless thing. However, the person hosting the palace treasury bidding this time was Fan Xian, the one who was the most unclear of relationships and the most ruthless and tyrannical in his actions. Taiping Money House would not take such a risk even if they were beaten to death. The courtyard immediately sank into a deathly silence. The hearts of the third generation of the Ming family began to feel nervous. Would they really have to watch the seventh Ming master steal away the Ming family's business tomorrow? After losing the right to market the palace treasury, the Ming family was just a landlord with the most land and could be slaughtered at any moment. This terrifying reality made the old Ming matriarch's brows furrow even deeper. She suddenly thought of a name and coldly said, "Recently, has there been anyone from Zhaoshang Money House who has come?" Ming Launcher shook his head. "They know we are a large customer of Taiping Money House. They probed a few times and probably knew they couldn't move us, so they backed off." The old Ming matriarch unconsciously nodded her head and said, "It looks like, it is not as I imagined." Because the accounts of Taiping Money House had always been in the hands of the old Ming matriarch, Ming Qingda had always strongly advocated a relationship with Zhaoshang Money House. Hearing his mother's words soften a little, his heart leaped with joy, but his expression was calm. They should be trustworthy. If there really is a problem, it shouldn't be this way of doing things. The old Ming matriarch furrowed her brows as if she was thinking about a difficult problem. After a long time, she said, "Send someone to Zhaoshang Money House." "No, don't send anyone. Launcher, go personally. See how much cash they can pull out tonight." "Yes, mother." Ming Qingda smiled slightly and then asked hesitantly, "How do we deal with Xia Qifei?" The old Ming matriarch's face became cold. "I don't know that person, you don't know him, and the Ming family doesn't know him. Since it is so, how do we deal with him? Don't get involved in this matter. Don't let the imperial envoy take the lead. Right now, the imperial envoy hopes that the Ming family will react fiercely, so we should be increasingly calm." Ming Qingda bowed deeply to the ground and sighed in admiration. Mother is wise. Ming Qingda had to deal with the matters of tomorrow's bidding and go to the accounts house to keep an eye on his brothers. Ming Launcher had to go into the city to find the mysterious Zhaoshang Money House that was rumored to have a Dongyi background. Thus, he did not stay long in the courtyard. After bowing, he retreated. The old Ming matriarch watched her son and grandson walk out of the little courtyard. Her eyes abruptly changed from the previous sternness to the present tiredness. She raised her pinky weakly and knocked on the armrest of the chair. The personal serving girl moved closer to the old woman's lips. The old woman closed her eyes. Her pinky remained raised for a long time. She did not put it down, nor did she speak. It was as if she was weighing something important. "Shao Qi." At this moment, a dark image seemed to rise in the old woman's tightly closed eyes. In the image, a woman with a face full of foxy charm was tossing and turning happily under a familiar man's body. She was smiling boastfully and proudly in front of her. The image changed. The woman had given birth to a child. She held the young infant and swaggered around Ming Garden. Her laughter was like a silver bell, floating and floating, all the way to the sky. The old woman suddenly opened her eyes filled with an ice-cold intent. Her pinky moved agitatedly, bending slightly. In this instant, she thought of many things from the past, such as when those heavy staffs landed on the woman's body, the beautiful scene of blood flying. That woman had been forced to the bottom of the well by her. The snowflakes on that day had also floated and floated all the way to the sky. That woman's body had probably long become dry bones. When a mouse crawled on top, it would only make unpleasant sounds. It would never be able to make a silvery bell-like laughter, right? After that old bastard died, she had the final say in the family. That woman had died, but it was not easy to kill the child she gave birth to. After all, he was the flesh and blood of the Ming family in name. Fortunately, Qingde was ruthless and used a whip to beat him every day. Finally, the child could not stand the humiliation and pain and ran out of Ming Garden one morning. Perhaps the child would never know that at that time, she had been watching him coldly from behind the door. Perhaps the child would never know that she had long prepared a killer and was waiting outside Ming Garden to send him down the dry well and reunite with his mother. But, how come that child did not die? Why did he not die? A glimmer of anger flashed through the old Ming matriarch's cold eyes. The fingers that had been perked up and slightly bent finally gently rested on the back of the chair. At the same time, her slightly dry lips opened slightly. She said in a quiet voice to the serving girl by her lips, "Please, Sir Zhou." When the old Ming matriarch finally made up her mind, her son and grandson were walking side by side. Ming Launcher gazed at his father with a face full of admiration and said, "You are saying that grandmother will definitely make a move against that bastard." "What bastard?" Ming Qingda's face was full of a warm smile. "That is your seventh uncle. Although he is our enemy right now, he is still your real seventh uncle." Ming Launcher smiled self-mockingly. He suddenly furrowed his brows and asked, "Killing seventh uncle can indeed completely end this matter, but how will the imperial envoy side react? No matter how powerful the Juanshan conference is, they can't rebel. Your grandmother is old." Ming Qingde sighed. From the beginning of this matter, the method she used was wrong. Ming Launcher shook his head. Ming Qingde suddenly smiled and said, "However, her mistake does not represent the Ming family's mistake. If your seventh uncle is not so lucky this time, it may not all be a bad thing. Don't worry too much, I know what to do." This ostensible master of the Ming family smiled coldly in his heart. Just let the Juanshan conference, which he could never control, clash with the Overwatch Council. Someone as astute and far-sighted as him naturally had a way to clean up this mess. He just didn't know what method he would use. "Sixth uncle has gotten a good one again this time," Ming Launcher suddenly said mockingly. Ming Qingda lovingly patted his son's shoulder and explained, "Old people always like their youngest son the most. Of course, it has to be her own." While the Ming family was in a mess, and at the same time, there were many mice eyeing each other covetously and thinking of trampling each other to death, the youngest son of the Ming family, Ming Qingqing, the present commander of the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei, the secret inspector of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council stationed in Jiangnan, was standing on the highest floor of the Jiangnan restaurant in Suzhou. He stood by the side of the building and gently stroked the wooden railing. He gazed thoughtfully at a place outside the city. That place had once been his home, a home he had not returned to for many years, Ming Garden. The gathering of the Jiangnan merchants had already ended. Although no one had set down any specific rules, looking at the greedy eyes of the Lingnan Xiong family and the Chuanzhou Sun family, Xia Qifei knew that the commissioner's plan had already worked. Tomorrow, the Ming family would not only have to face his own attack, but they would also have to face attacks similar to the alliance of the Xiong and Sun families. Merchants always had to eat meat. When they were too hungry, who cared whose meat it was? Xia Qifei narrowed his eyes slightly. Ming Garden was too far away. Standing on the tall roof of the Jiangnan restaurant, it was impossible to clearly see the lights in it. Today was the most unrestrained day he had ever lived since he was lucky enough to survive in this world. He finally said his name proudly in front of everyone, Ming Qingqing. Compared to this, the pleasure of using silver to smash people, leaving his identity as a Jianghu person, and standing on the stage of the Qing kingdom were all not much. As long as he could say his real name, it was like slapping that evil old woman of the Ming family in the face. This pleasure of revenge covered up everything else and made Xia Qifei feel incomparably grateful to Fan Xian. Even when Fan Xian had sent 7 swordsmen, he did not feel a glimmer of unhappiness. He was intoxicated and hurt by everything that had happened today. It was to the point that this ambitious and ruthless person on the Jianghu did not notice that a few strange people had appeared on the opposite street. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 368. Starting today, the monthly votes will be doubled. Canvas votes, canvas votes. Please give me the monthly votes in your hands. Put your palms together and salute. I will also pretend to be an ascetic. Xia Qifei left Jiangnan restaurant and stood in front of the main street. Looking at the people passing by in the night, he couldn't resist lowering his head slightly, thinking about something. Big brother. Outside the building, a dozen men surrounded him. They looked at him with a glimmer of respect and unfamiliarity, and bowed respectfully. These people were all good hands of the Jiangnan water bandits. Because of the palace treasury bidding, they had followed Xia Qifei into Suzhou. However, Suzhou had always been heavily guarded. Some of these water bandits were even on wanted posters, so normally, they would not enter Suzhou. These people had not expected that they, as bandits, could not only openly wander through Suzhou, but that their leader could even sit at the same table as the wealthiest large merchant families in Jiangnan. Normally, those merchants would only use silver to buy the lives of their brothers to fight. How could they be as polite to Brother Xia as they were today? Thinking of this, a sense of vanity and pride arose in the hearts of these men. The way of the world was indeed different from before. Looking at his subordinates' faces filled with panic and joy, Xia Qifei couldn't resist laughing at himself and saying, "Brothers, you all have to learn more. This time, you've also seen those old teachers. When you have free time, ask those teachers for guidance." The teachers in these words were the old officials of the Ministry of Revenue that Imperial Envoy Xia Qifei had sent to help him win the bidding. The Jiangnan water bandits were gradually developing in the direction of trading. Xia Qifei also hoped that his trusted subordinates could quickly grasp the skills of doing business. At least they had to know how to do accounts. Amidst the joyous and harmonious atmosphere, Xia Qifei suddenly felt a glimmer of coldness. He raised his head and looked. The bright moon was in the blue dome of the night. It was still spring, so the nights on sunny days were indeed a bit colder. Pulling back his gaze, he saw 3 strange people standing on the opposite side of the street. The reason why he said these 3 people were strange was that they had appeared out of nowhere and looked coldly at the street. They were not tourists returning home at night, nor were they guests seeking pleasure after drinking. They were dressed in ordinary clothes, but the person in the middle was wearing a conical hat. On a night like this, he seemed a little special. Having mingled in Jianghu for many years, he had struggled between life and death since he was a child. Xia Qifei had no time to react. The chill in his bones and his intuition for danger made a cold light shoot out of his eyes. With a strange cry, the tips of his feet pushed off the ground 3 times, and his entire body floated toward the door of the Jiangnan restaurant. When the tip of his foot touched the ground, the person in the middle of the 3 people across the street placed his hand under the bamboo hat on his shoulder, grasping something. Then, a snow-like blade light sprinkled down, chasing after Xia Qifei's body that was treading on the water like a water bird, chopping down. Kill! When the blade light flashed, the Jiangnan water bandits also reacted. Relying on the bravery in their bones, they wanted to stand between their big brother and the soul-chasing blade light. However, their reactions could never catch up to the blade light of the man in the bamboo hat. Only the trusted aide closest to Xia Qifei let out a wild roar and pulled out the straight knife hidden in his clothes. He channeled his strength through his arms and used all his strength to block. With a crisp crack, the straight knife in the hands of the water bandits was like a tender lotus root in Jiangnan. It was cut in half by the blade light. With a loud crash, the man's body was split into 2 by that extremely violent saber strike, turning into 2 pieces of horrifying flesh and blood. Blood spurted out, and internal organs spilled all over the ground. The 2 hands that had already been separated were still holding the hilt and the tip of the saber, powerlessly and miserably defending themselves. The power of the blade did not stop. In the quiet night, it had already reached the front of the Jiangnan restaurant, in front of Xia Qifei, whose toes had just touched the ground. The energy of the blade was like a straight line, cutting people when it met people, cutting the ground when it met ground. With a swish, it broke through the green stones on the street, revealing the fresh stone stubble within. With a loud boom, rocks flew in front of the Jiangnan restaurant, and dust rose. With a roar, Xia Qifei's 2 palms came together to meet the indomitable power of the blade. The blade light suddenly faded, and the dust gradually settled. 2 streaks of blood spurted from Xia Qifei's nostrils. His hands trembled in front of his body, and he looked with terror at the man in the bamboo hat on the opposite street. This wild blade had come across a long street, cut through a person's body, and caused him internal injury. What kind of terrifying realm was this? He was probably already a 9th-level master. How could there be such an unfamiliar top master in Jiangnan? The wild and unreasonable blade cut through the night sky. After a moment of silence, everyone finally saw the man in the bamboo hat. The man in the bamboo hat was tall, and his entire body exuded a stern and cautious aura. He held a long blade in his hand. The blade was as bright as snow, and the hilt was extremely long. It was a long blade that could only be seen on stage or on the battlefield. This blade was 8 feet long, and no one knew how he had managed to hide it behind his back earlier. All of this happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. After Xia Qifei desperately blocked this blade, he blinked. In the blink of an eye, he discovered that the situation was somewhat terrifying, because the 2 people beside the man in the bamboo hat had disappeared without a trace. He didn't know where they had gone. Since the opponent had come to kill him, the 2 of them would definitely not sit idly by. In reality, just as the man in the bamboo hat pulled out the long blade on his back and valiantly chopped down across the street, the other 2 aces beside him had already floated up, avoiding the group of Jiangnan water bandits in the middle of the street. Their bodies were like flying swallows, forming 2 beautiful arcs. Like 2 dark arrowheads, they pierced towards Xia Qifei's location. Using the long blade as a mountain of thunder, concealing the combined attack of 2 swallows flying at the same time, if nothing unexpected happened, the panic-stricken Xia Qifei should have already died in that moment. The reason he did not die was because when Xia Qifei barely managed to block that blade, a new change had already occurred on the long street. When the Jiangnan water bandits moved in front of Xia Qifei to block him, there were 4 people in this group of men who very strangely moved to the sides. Then, when the 2 aces who swept past like swallows wanted to dodge to the sides, these 4 people flipped their palms and pulled out metal drills from under their long robes, stabbing them horizontally. It was a very clean, simple, and neat stab, but it just so happened to land on the chests and abdomens of the 2 aces. They had no choice but to dodge. These 4 people were the assassins of the 6th Bureau that Fan Xian had hurriedly sent over tonight. Perhaps the skill of the 6th Bureau assassins was not as good as the 3 aces who had come to kill tonight, but their judgment of the current situation and the possible routes that the other party would choose to kill had a natural sensitivity. Thus, they blocked the 2 swallows that the other party had intended to kill together. Ding, 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 ding. In an instant, countless light and crisp sounds rang out on the street in front of the Jiangnan restaurant. They were densely packed, as if they would never stop. It was as if a storm of hail had suddenly descended on the bright and beautiful city of Suzhou in spring. 2 swallow-like aces held 2 short swords in their hands. There was poison on them, and they glowed in the darkness. The 4 6th Bureau assassin swordsmen held iron rods in their hands. They were also poisoned and blended into the darkness. A moment later, a number of muffled grunts seemed to ring out at the same time. The 2 aces who had come to kill Xia Qifei dejectedly swept back across the street. There were a dozen cuts on their clothes from the metal rods. Some of the cuts were deep and seemed to have broken through their skin. On the 6th Bureau side, they had also paid a heavy price for this. One person's left hand had been neatly sliced off, revealing the bone inside. Another person's shoulder had been stabbed with a knife. A strange color began to appear in the fresh blood, and one person had already fallen into a pool of blood. The 2 sides had just met face to face, and both sides had suffered irreparable losses. No one knew what kind of danger there had been in those tinkling sounds. Even after suffering such heavy injuries, the 6th Bureau assassins only let out 2 muffled grunts at most. Their willpower and determination were not something normal Jianghu people could compare to. The 3 people who could still move ate the antidote pills made by the 3rd Bureau as they tried to retreat and shrink the defensive circle. They had to protect Xia Qifei's life. The 2 swallows who had retreated across the street did not seem to have thought that there would be such a group of professional assassins by Xia Qifei's side, and that they had also suffered significant injuries. The 2 of them looked at each other and knew that the other side was definitely someone from the Overwatch Council. No matter which faction, they all knew the terrifying extent of the Overwatch Council's poison. Not everyone could withstand the poison that Sir Fei Jie single-handedly took care of. Thus, the 2 of them cleanly turned around and rose. The tips of their feet pushed off the wall and swept into the night sky, immediately disappearing. They were all true aces and assassins of the Jiangnan martial world. Today, they had been entrusted with the task of killing Xia Qifei, but they could not bear to bury their precious lives here. In the distance, a light sound came from the dark alley. 2 of the 3 masters on the opposite side of the street had left, but Xia Qifei felt that his situation hadn't improved at all. In fact, the pressure he was under was even greater, because that long saber, the long saber that could only be seen on the stage, had already charged at him again when the 2 sides were fighting intensely. Before the knife, there was not a single enemy. Under the knife, there would not be a complete corpse. Like splashing snow, the knife light dismembered, separated, and beheaded the brave and respectable water bandits, creating a path of blood. Amidst the sky full of flying limbs, it came closer and closer to Xia Qifei. Seeing his brothers die wretchedly on the long street, hearing the soul-shaking sounds of knives and wretched cries, smelling the thick scent of blood, and seeing the man in the bamboo hat step through the blood, the man walked with such determination and stubbornness, like a demon. Xia Qifei's heart went cold, but his blood heated up. His eyes were about to burst, and he was filled with the desire to charge forward, stand in front of his brothers, and engage in a vigorous battle with this expert in the bamboo hat. Even if he died under the blade, so what? However, he could not move. Instead, he retreated. Sorrowfully but determinedly, he fled toward Jiangnan restaurant. He knew that the other party's goal was to kill him. His name, this person, was very useful. If he wanted revenge, if he wanted to make the enemy unable to eat or sleep in peace, he had to live. Even if he had to live in such humiliation. The man in the bamboo hat was only 5 steps away from Xia Qifei. The 3 injured swordsmen of the 6th Bureau finally returned to their positions, but their injured bodies could not stand against the ace in the bamboo hat's shocking knife power. The metal rod broke into several pieces, and the 3 of them were sent flying. Jiangnan restaurant was right in front of him. Xia Qifei fled up the steps. The waiters and customers at the door screamed in panic, but it was as if they were possessed. They were shocked by this bloody and terrifying scene. Their legs weakened, and it seemed they could not move. The ace in the bamboo hat was still 5 steps away from the stone steps when his knife chopped down. The direction of the knife was aimed at the wretched-looking Xia Qifei's back. A customer who seemed to have been scared out of his wits was currently trembling against the beautiful pillars of Jiangnan restaurant. Then, for some reason, he shook out a metal drill and viciously stabbed it at the thigh of the expert wearing the bamboo hat. The ace with the bamboo hat was tall and powerful. This hidden assassin of the 6th Bureau did not have the confidence to attack the enemy's vital point before he could cut through Xia Qifei's body. Thus, he chose to stab the base of his thigh. No one expected that the ace in the bamboo hat would act as if he did not see this stab. The knife continued to chop down. With a clang, the metal rod struck the base of the man's thigh, but it was like stabbing a metal plate. The 6th Bureau assassin's heart chilled. He knew that this was the stupid martial art that no one on the Jianghu practiced anymore, iron shirt. Since the other party had practiced it and did not avoid it, it meant that he had stupidly spent decades practicing it, abandoned all the pleasures of a man and a woman, and practiced this martial art to the extreme. This 6th Bureau assassin knew he could not block this knife, but the commissioner had given a strict order to protect Xia Qifei's life. Thus, he flew sideways and fearlessly jumped toward the ace in the bamboo hat. In midair, he had already pulled out a small dagger from his boot and viciously stabbed it toward the eyes that were covered by the bamboo hat. At this moment, the ace's knife was less than a foot from Xia Qifei's back. The 2 metal rods once again appeared, tirelessly. There were a total of 7 6th Bureau swordsmen that Fan Xian had sent to protect Xia Qifei. Earlier, 5 had already appeared. The last 2 had originally been prepared to be like the leader earlier and attack the enemy's vital point to save Xia Qifei's life. However, after discovering the other party's abnormal martial arts, they knew that method would not work. Furthermore, the knife had already arrived, so they could only helplessly meet the other party's blow head-on. 2 very unpleasant snaps rang out. The 2 metal rods did not break, but they were shaken out of their hands. Xia Qifei took advantage of this block and threw himself forward like a pitiful puppy, narrowly dodging the knife. The knife light landed and cut a large hole in the stone steps of Jiangnan restaurant. Xia Qifei gave a cry and spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. He had been locked onto by this ace's aura the entire time. The knife attacked his body, so he was the one with the heaviest internal injuries. He spat out a mouthful of fresh blood, but his expression remained dark and ruthless as he lay on the ground. His right hand shot out from under his left armpit with incredible speed and pulled out the crossbow arrow hidden in his sleeve. This was something the imperial envoy had given him for self-defense. When the crossbow arrow flew, the 6th Bureau swordsman had already leaped in front of the ace's body. The ace didn't have time to pull back his long knife. His left hand formed a fist and struck out horizontally. With a boom, the swordsman was sent flying. In this way, there was an opening in front of his face. The thin crossbow arrow shot in front of the bamboo hat. The man finally had a trace of a normal reaction. He tilted his head back slightly. It looked like the face was still a weak spot despite his tyrannical martial arts. The arrow flew through the air and, with a whoosh, pierced deeply into the top of the bamboo hat. There was a belt tied under the bamboo hat, so it was not taken away by the crossbow arrow. Thus, the true appearance of this mysterious 9th level ace was still not revealed to the crowd. A light sound rang out, but it was not crisp. It was like the sound of children playing with firecrackers or the crackling sound of wet firewood burning. The crossbow arrow embedded in the top of the bamboo hat exploded. A streak of fire flashed by. Immediately, a cloud of smoke rose from the ace's head. It looked incomparably strange. Although the modifications of the Third Bureau were still unable to bring out the true power of the gunpowder, and the power of the burning was not strong enough, it still burned the bamboo hat clean in an instant. The ace in the bamboo hat held a long knife in his hand. His feet were unevenly spaced as he stood silently in front of the Jiangnan restaurant. His face was pitch black with terrifying blisters in the middle. His eyes were tightly closed. It was unclear whether he was alive or dead. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, and a glimmer of anger flashed through them. This mysterious ace was still not dead. However, what caused everyone to be indescribably shocked was not the fact that this person had managed to preserve his life under such a heavy blow, because with his strength, it was not so easy to kill him. What shocked Xia Qifei and the Overwatch Council the most was that this ace, who always wore the bamboo hat, was bald. Nowadays, the world was particular about filial piety. It was said that the body, hair, and skin were given to one's parents. No one would randomly cut their hair, much less be bald. The only people in this world who were allowed to walk around with a bald appearance were the ascetic monks. The ascetic monks who believed in the temple. Everyone knew that the ascetic monks loved the people and cherished their bodies. They never had anything to do with the battles of the secular world. Why had this extremely powerful ascetic monk come to kill Xia Qifei today? There was no time to think about this shocking question because the ascetic monk once again raised that terrifying long knife. With a muffled grunt, he held the knife with both hands and chopped toward Xia Qifei on the steps. His power was like a mad tiger that could not be stopped by 1,000 soldiers. 1,000 soldiers could not be stopped by a single flower. The despairing people on the stone steps only felt a cool breeze sweep past in front of them. A flower-like ocean bloomed in front of their eyes. In a moment, it drove away the smell of blood on the long street in front of the restaurant. Fragrant flowers filled the air and refreshed the mind. A pair of steady and gentle hands, carrying a basket of cheap silk flowers bought from Wuzhou, welcomed the sharp edge of the long knife that pressed forward with indomitable will. The knife came very quickly, but the hands were even faster. For some reason, in the next moment, the flower basket was already hanging from the long knife. The knife force was very fierce. The flower basket was very light. When the flower basket gently hung from the tip of the knife, the long knife, which had been steady and terrifying, involuntarily trembled and drooped down. It was as if the flower basket was incomparably heavy. The knife force paused. The ascetic monk holding the knife gave an explosive cry. Jinchi surged out of his arms and valiantly lifted it up like he was lifting up Dong Mountain. With a crashing sound, the flower basket finally could not withstand the resistance of the astonishing true energy from both sides. It was pierced by the tip of the saber and fell apart. The flower basket that was woven from the vines was pulled out bit by bit in that moment that seemed to have come to a standstill. The vines shattered and turned into countless fragments that shot out and hit the ground with a paw-paw sound. The silk flowers in the basket were stirred up by the wind and fluttered into the air, decorating the long street like an azure battlefield. Amidst the rain of flower petals, the girl wearing a flowery cotton jacket was like a gust of wind. Following the trembling long knife, she gently attacked the ascetic monk. The ascetic monk struck out with his palm. The wind from his palm was like a knife, but it could not stop the other party's swaying figure. A moment later, the pair of gentle hands gently patted the hilt of the knife. Then, with a flick of her fingers, it pierced straight toward the edge of the ascetic monk's huge palm. The ascetic monk gave a strange cry. A strange red color formed from the Jinchi surging appeared on his burned face. His entire body retreated like a large bird. In one exchange, this killing godlike ascetic monk had been forced back. The rain of flower petals was still falling. Contrasted with the blue night and bright moon above Suzhou, it appeared particularly beautiful. Flower petals fell one after another. Haitang stood calmly in the rain of flower petals. She did not pursue. She only looked at the ascetic monk with a trace of worry. Village girls occasionally had their most beautiful moments. Second priest of the Qing temple, why are you here? Haitang asked with a face full of worry. The ascetic monk looked at her and recognized her identity. In a stern voice, he cried out, Haitang duo duo. Why are you here? Haitang lowered her head slightly and quietly said, I'm with Fan Xian. The ascetic monk was startled. It was as if he had not thought that Haitang, the successor of Tian Yi Dao and Northern Qi's saint girl, would give such a reason so easily. Today, I want to kill. Don't stop me, the ascetic monk looked at her and said coldly. Haitang furrowed her brows slightly. She looked at the stone steps of Jiangnan restaurant, the dead people in the middle of the long street, the broken limbs, and the pungent blood. In a quiet voice, she said, You've already killed enough people tonight. Don't kill anymore. It was not a request or a persuasion. Since Fan Xian was worried about Xia Qifei's side and had come up with the idea to have Haitang come take a look, it represented his absolute trust in Haitang. With Haitang here, other than the legendary four old immortals, as long as she said not to kill, no one else could kill. Although the ascetic monk had been badly burned, it was still possible to see a glimmer of determination on his face. He glanced at Haitang with a strange gaze and then turned to leave. He didn't need a path to leave. The ascetic monk directly smashed through a courtyard wall on the side of the street. With a rumble, a large hole appeared in the wall. His figure disappeared into this hole. The sky full of flower petals fell. Haitang was silent. Then, her body floated lightly and she arrived behind the courtyard wall. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 369. I started running a fever yesterday and my mind is a bit muddled. I will continue to lie down in a bit. If my body improves slowly, perhaps I will write less tomorrow. Haitang swept into the courtyard beside the street and gently stroked the strands of hair at her temples. She looked at the ascetic monk who had indeed not left. Those who could live on the two sides of the street were naturally wealthy and respectable. After the intrusion, the owner of the house had long woken up and hid far away, not daring to light a lamp. At this moment, the light from the restaurant across the street shone through the large hole in the wall and into the courtyard. It also shone on this person's face, which appeared particularly terrifying after his injury. Haitang looked at him and asked with slight worry, "Why is it like this?" The ascetic monk only looked at her calmly and did not reply. Haitang was not in a hurry, although the faint sound of the Suzhou government officials moving their chains could already be heard in the distance. There were not many ascetic monks in this world. The ascetic monks, led by the great priest of the Qing temple, always preached in various places. These ascetic monks silently recited the wondrous meaning of scriptures and did good deeds. They had never been a power known for their martial strength. However, during these decades, the Qing temple had produced an anomaly, Great Master Sanshi. He was born with divine strength and had cultivated his internal and external martial arts to the peak. Additionally, his personality was ruthless and he hated evil like an enemy. However, because of his identity as a priest, very few people had seen him fight. Few people knew his true face and power. Of course, this was also because the previous great priest of the Qing temple had always used scriptures to advise him and watched him closely. Otherwise, this great master Sanshi would have long become the most famous figure in the world. After all, the Qing temple and northern Qi's Tianyi Dao were both places where the temple was worshipped and could be considered to be of the same lineage. Thus, Haitang had seen him once in the past. She knew that the ascetic monk in front of her, the second priest of the Qing temple, the legendary great master Sanshi, was a noble figure purely in terms of status. In terms of temperament and cultivation, he was not a bloodthirsty person. Thus, what she did not understand was why the priest, who had never involved himself in worldly affairs, would join the palace treasury or the struggle of the court. Juanshan Conference, just what kind of organization is it? Haitang said with a slight frown, as if she was talking to herself. The second priest looked coldly at her and said, "Don't waste your time thinking about these problems." "Yes, I am a member of the Juanshan Conference." The Juanshan Conference has always been a loose association. Perhaps this organization never had a specific goal. Once everyone found a certain goal, they would advance together towards that goal. Haitang asked softly, "Then what is your goal?" "Kill Xia Qifei." The second priest said coldly. Haitang smiled and said, "It's just a dispute between merchants. How could it attract your attention?" She calmly asked, "Xia Qifei has already won a bid in the palace treasury. You chose to kill him in the middle of the street. Are you not afraid of the anger of the Qing court?" The second priest said expressionlessly, "Killing Xia Qifei is only to return the palace treasury matter to the path we want." Haitang was slightly taken aback and said in great confusion, "These words are not enough to convince me. I understand you and the high priest. You are not a person who covets fame and wealth." The second priest fell silent. Haitang then said in a quiet voice, "The Ming family also does not have the right to invite you." The second priest slowly raised his head. "As I said earlier, this is a loose collaboration. However, my goal and the Ming family's goal just happen to be the same." "You want to deal with Fan Xian?" Haitang's brows furrowed. The second priest shook his head coldly. Haitang sighed in her heart. She guessed the truth of the matter. The other person's identity was special. Since he could not be ordered by anyone, yet he wanted to interfere in the palace treasury bidding matter, it must be because of the problems in Jingdo. Since the second priest's goal was not Fan Xian, then the source of the matter was about to be revealed. Haitang shook her head and said, "It is truly hard to believe that a priest of the Qing temple would secretly oppose the Qing emperor." Countless blisters had appeared on the second priest's face. There were threads of blood in the black ash. It looked terrifying. The pupils of his eyes turned white. Faintly, he said, "The saint girl is clever. The imperial envoy has come under the emperor's order to rectify the palace treasury. What I am thinking is to make this so-called emperor's order forever unable to be carried out." Haitang was silent. It looked like an undercurrent had already begun to appear within the Qing court. The direction of the undercurrent was directed toward the man sitting on the dragon chair. As the man's most favored and trusted official, Fan Xian would stand at the forefront and face great danger if nothing unexpected happened. The reason the second priest was willing to reveal so many secrets in front of Haitang was because of Haitang's identity as a northern Qi person and the closeness between the Qing temple and Tianyi Dao. The second priest knew that no matter how close Haitang was to Fan Xian, as a northern Qi person, knowing that someone within the Qing kingdom was preparing to harm the emperor, he would maintain a clever silence. Haitang was silent for a moment and then suddenly said, "Master, it is not wise to ask a tiger for its skin." The loose Juanshan conference had to walk closer together because of that terrifying reason. For such a major matter, there had to be someone taking the lead. Based on Haitang's analysis, the leader was perhaps the eldest princess who had never shown much power but had made Fan Xian carefully guard against. The second priest coldly said, "In the eyes of a flower, the worm is the tiger. In the eyes of a bamboo, the fire is the tiger. In the eyes of a river, the sun is the tiger. In my eyes, the emperor is the tiger." Haitang furrowed her brows and asked, "What exactly happened? What kind of matter would make the second priest of the Qing temple so resolutely throw himself into this messy world? What made the ascetic monk, who had always been merciful and pitiful to the people, become a demonic Asura who beheaded people?" A glimmer of sadness and reminiscence flashed through the second priest's terrifying eyes. A moment later, he gently said, "Senior disciple has passed away." Haitang was slightly startled. The news of the Qing temple's great priest's death had already spread throughout the world a few months ago. At the time, the Qing court had issued an edict saying that the great priest had been preaching in the south for many years and had entered a foul miasma for a long time. He had become ill from overwork, so not long after returning to the capital, he had died in bed. Hearing the second priest say this, Haitang understood that the inside story was certainly not so simple. Perhaps the death of the great priest of the Qing temple had much to do with the Qing emperor. She put her hands together and bowed. She knew she couldn't continue asking this question. He had already given her enough hints and wouldn't say anything more. "Earlier, why didn't you stop me from revealing your identity?" Haitang asked silently. "Killing people on the street today, were you not worried that you would inadvertently alert the enemy and that the Qing emperor would notice some clues?" The second priest of the Qing temple expressionlessly raised 3 fingers. "There are 3 stones in the mountain. One is bright, one is upright, and one is abandoned." From a young age, Sancher was different from normal people. He was chased into the wilderness by the villagers. "If not for my senior disciple, he would have long been buried in the bellies of wild dogs." The second priest of the Qing temple's voice was like a large bell. His beard and hair floated in the wind. He was powerful without being angry. "The people of the world have taken my senior disciple's life. I will disturb the hearts of the world. I will use bright skills to kill people, use a righteous voice to deceive people, and use my body as an abandoned pawn to kill a chaotic ruler and bring peace to the people." Haitang understood the first 2 meanings of these words, but she didn't understand the last one. However, countless complicated emotions still surged in her heart. Although there were already signs of division within the Qing court, looking at the Qing emperor's powerful control over the governors of the 7 roads and the military, she knew that there were no fundamental problems with the Qing kingdom's rule. Sancher killing people on the street tonight was nothing more than using bright skills and righteous voice to announce to the world that the priests of the Qing temple and the court were no longer companions on the same path. Although the second priest was not enough to represent the entire Qing temple and all the believers and ascetic monks under heaven, this kind of declaration still had a powerful symbolic meaning. As for the last word, abandon, Haitang finally understood. Great Master Sancher also knew that the instigator behind the scenes of the Juanshan conference was not much better than the Qing emperor. His actions today were, for one, to kill Xia Qifei and destroy the Qing emperor's grand policy. For another, it was resolutely abandoning her. Perhaps this second priest didn't even know what he should be doing. After losing the great priest's teachings and restrictions, Sancher had no way of killing the emperor. Furthermore, the priests of the Qing temple did not want the people of the world to suffer for the sake of revenge. For Sanshi, the people of the Jiangnan water bandits were blood-stained bandits. If they were killed, then they were killed. There was not a trace of pity in his heart. However, the powerful desire for revenge in his heart, his judgment of the situation, and his worry for the people of the world made this Sanshi sink into a mental conflict. Thus, he told Haitang these things. At the same time, he told her that he was willing to be a sacrificial pawn. I will return to Jingdo to kill people and tell Imperial Advisor Ku He what I said today. Sanshi was silent and melancholy at odds with his magnificent figure. He turned and left the courtyard, which already had a large hole in it. Haitang stood quietly without any movement. She thought to herself that the second priest of the Qing temple had so easily abandoned her, but the Juanshan conference would certainly have follow-up actions. She didn't know if they would target Fan Xian far away in Jiangnan or the Qing emperor sitting peacefully in Jingdo. It looked like there were many people in this world who didn't want the Qing emperor to live comfortably. How should the Qi kingdom respond? Sanshi. A sacrificial pawn. Fan Xian looked at Haitang with a not quite there smile, but a dark fire danced in his eyes. I don't understand the enigmatic conversation between you people. I only know that if he truly wanted to abandon himself, he should have charged directly into the front gates of the royal palace and fought a great battle with the great prince's imperial soldiers and eunuch Hong in the palace instead of running into Suzhou and ruining my plans. To kill my people. The last two sentences were spoken in a higher voice. His tone was very severe. As for the word abandon, Haitang gazed at him calmly and said, the Juanshan conference certainly doesn't want the second priest to reveal his identity so early. If I hadn't been there today, probably no one would have had the opportunity to reveal this secret. The meaning behind these words was clear. The enemy's calculations had gone wrong. The second priest had failed to kill, so he might as well give up. He laid out all the problems in front of Haitang and used himself to attract the Qing emperor's attention while hiding the other existences of the Juanshan conference. Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, this second priest thinks too highly of himself. Perhaps the emperor has nothing, but his confidence, which I don't know where it comes from, is stronger than everyone else's. If I were you, how could I bear to let that baldy leave so peacefully? He only said a few simple words and convinced you to ignore it. It looks like this second priest truly has the ability to be a lobbyist. These words appeared normal, but they actually contained a criticism. In his anger, Fan Xian straightforwardly expressed that there was a portion of the conversation between the second priest and Haitang that Haitang had not directly said. After all, this was internal Qing politics. As a northern Qi person, no one could say for sure what Haitang would do for the benefit of her own country. Haitang was not angry. She explained in a quiet voice, the Juanshan conference will certainly protect the Ming family, and the old matriarch also fell for your provocation. She invited someone to kill Xia Qifei. Isn't this all within your expectations? Why are you still so angry? Fan Xian paused. He had not expected that Haitang would so mercilessly reveal all of her sinister thoughts. He furrowed his brows and said, correct, I wanted to force the Ming family to act. However, I had not thought that the Ming family would be able to invite such an ace. It looks like I still underestimated the so-called Juanshan conference. Tonight, there were heavy casualties in front of Jiangnan restaurant. About 80 to 90% of the Jiangnan water bandits that Xia Qifei had brought into Suzhou had been killed by that sharp knife. In order to protect Xia Qifei's life, the Overwatch Council had paid a heavy price. One of the 7 assassins of the 6th Bureau had died. At this moment, there were still 4 people unconscious. No one knew if they would survive. Ever since Fan Xian had taken over the Overwatch Council, this was the Overwatch Council's biggest loss. He couldn't help but blame himself and be angry. Everything had clearly been within his calculations. Unfortunately, because he had underestimated the other party's strength, it had led to this situation. What made Fan Xian most angry was, in the plan, once the Ming family was forced to act, he could use the opportunity to attack. However, all of this had been destroyed by Haitang's cry on Chong Street. The second priest. At most, the second priest of the Qing temple would have dealings with the royal family. If Fan Xian wanted to use this matter to investigate the Ming family, it was impossible. Even if he used the Overwatch Council's most sinister and dirty methods to frame them, it would be impossible to convince the court and the officials in Jingdou. No one believed that a wealthy Jiangnan Ming family could order the second priest of the Qing temple to act as an assassin. This reality made Fan Xian feel an absurd sense of defeat. In the past, when he faced enemies, even if it was not the other party who did it, he could still frame them and make them admit it. Now, it was clearly the other party who did it. If he openly investigated it, no one would believe him. He shook his head helplessly and waved his hand. Duo, go to sleep first. I was in a bad mood earlier, so my words were a bit harsh. Don't take it to heart. Haitang glanced at him with some surprise and furrowed her brows. Tonight? Fan Xian took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the burning feeling in his heart. A warm smile rose again to his face. In a quiet voice, he said, "It's very late. If there's anything else, we'll talk about it tomorrow." For tonight, Fan Xian had prepared for a long time. To suddenly give up at this moment, no one knew what he was thinking. Haitang left the study somewhat sullenly. Fan Xian sat quietly in front of the desk and thought for a bit. He then began to raise his brush and write on a piece of paper. He had to report what happened tonight to the emperor in Jingdou. In reality, he did not think that the appearance of the second priest was anything remarkable. As an official, even if he also harbored evil intentions, he had to display an attitude of concern and fear at the appropriate time. After finishing the secret letter, he couldn't resist picking up the letter beside it. The handwriting on the letter was dry and ugly. It was the handwriting of that old man called Chen Pingping. In the letter, Chen Pingping did not say anything about the court or officialdom. He only told a short story, a story about crows drinking water. He warned Fan Xian, who was not by his side, that no matter what it was, he could not be rushed. The more rushed he was, the less water he would have to drink. Throwing a stone into a bottle. This was a game where if you wanted to take, you had to first give. Fan Xian looked at this letter and furrowed his brows. Today, in the palace treasury courtyard, Ming Qingda had left a deep impression on him. The old Ming master's ability to remain calm in the face of chaos was truly worth learning from. In comparison, the old Ming matriarch, who had been successfully stirred up by him and had secretly notified the Juanshang conference to kill people on the street, did not seem to be much of a problem. However, the old matriarch was still in power in the Ming family. This reality made Fan Xian's heart relax a little. The person who had acted was the second priest. This matter had many implications, so it was not suitable to act immediately. Fan Xian thought for a bit and decided to push the date back a few days. Xia Qifei was lucky and did not die. Tomorrow, the palace treasury bidding still had to continue. Life also had to go on, and the days also had to go on. After everything had calmed down, when the stone had reached the bottleneck, he would begin to drink water. Going out, he said as he accepted a large cloak from Cece's hands. Cece looked at him in astonishment, thinking that it was almost midnight. Where were they going to go? However, she knew that the young master was in a hurry to go out at this time. Something big must have happened, so she didn't ask further. Fan Xian put on the crane cloak and hurried toward the front door of Ming Garden. As he walked, he said to the subordinate beside him, "This matter has gotten out of hand. Immediately send out a first-level council order." Increase the search for the second priest's whereabouts in the southeast. The subordinate furrowed his brows and replied, Sir, the Qing temple has always been managed by the palace. Let's also interfere. Fan Xian was slightly angry and scolded, He's already come to kill us, why can't I kill him? The subordinate quickly shut his mouth and gave the order. In reality, Fan Xian's words also had other intentions. Haitang had said earlier that the second priest looked like he was preparing to go to Jingdo and assassinate Jing Ku, yet Fan Xian had the Overwatch Council search the southeast. The shadow was not in Suzhou, and the Overwatch Council's current manpower could not keep Great Master Sanshi. Fan Xian's actions were nothing more than a gesture. First, it prevented his subordinates from meeting this ace again and suffering heavy losses. Second, it allowed the second priest to enter the capital. Clearly, the second priest had entered the capital to play dragon slaying, yet Fan Xian had made such arrangements. No one knew what he was thinking. Walking to the front door, Tiger Guard Gauda helped him lift the curtain. Fan Xian had one foot on the carriage and stopped. He seemed to be thinking about something. A moment later, he turned around and said, Call back all of the people standing outside tonight. The Overwatch Council official was slightly startled. He wondered if tonight's plan had been cancelled. Given his understanding of the commissioner, if his subordinate suffered a loss, he would immediately retaliate. Had the commissioner suddenly changed his personality? Ignoring his subordinate's shock, Fan Xian crawled into the carriage. The wheels of the carriage rolled across the stone path of Suzhou and made a clattering sound. At this time, it was already late into the night. There were no pedestrians on the streets. There were only the Suzhou government bailiffs who had learned of what had happened. They glanced around with sleepy eyes. However, they were fine. At least, they were more relaxed than the brothers in front of Jiangnan restaurant. It was said that the brothers there were carrying corpses and picking up severed limbs. A few of them had already vomited in disgust. Fan Xian half leaned against the back of the chair and gently pinched between his brows with both hands. He forcefully pushed away the tiredness in his mind and the powerful urge to jump out and kill at any moment. He allowed the carriage to take him along the quiet Suzhou night streets. Beside the carriage were a few tiger guards. Xia Qifei had been attacked, so Fan Xian's security had been increased. Before long, the carriage came to the side door of the Jiangnan governor's manor. There was no time to hand over any name cards. Fan Xian straightforwardly used his face as a pass and burrowed all the way into the manor. Under the confused escort of the manor's housekeeper and servants, he came directly to the flower hall in the back garden that the manor used for receiving secret guests. He hadn't even taken 2 sips of tea when the Jiangnan governor Shui Qing, who the housekeeper said had long fallen asleep, rushed over. Fan Xian raised his head and looked at Shui Qing's attire. After a moment of surprise, he smiled. The governor's clothes were neat and tidy. It didn't look like he had just been woken up by him. It looked like the officials in Suzhou would not be able to sleep well tonight. Shui Qing saw him smile and couldn't resist smiling as well. He waved his hand to have everyone leave. He took a sip of tea and moistened his throat. Straightforwardly, he asked, Imperial Envoy, what business do you have to come in the middle of the night? Fan Xian's answer was even more direct. He raised a finger and said, Tonight, someone wants to kill my people, so I am preparing to kill. The Jiangnan governor was slightly startled and sank into silence. Of course, he knew what had happened in Suzhou tonight. He had also expected that Fan Xian, who had always been sinister and protective, would certainly act against the Ming family. However, he had not thought that the other party would come to inform him beforehand. This kind of attitude made Shui Qing feel a glimmer of comfort. Shui Qing thought for a moment and then said evenly, I can understand the imperial envoy's current feelings. These words were as good as not saying anything. Understanding did not mean support. Fan Xian also understood this point. After all, the Ming family was a prominent family in Jiangnan. There were tens of thousands of children in the family. Their support in court was even more so. The Ming family's hands and feet had long been deeply embedded into the lives of the Jiangnan people. If Fan Xian wanted to use the martial power of the Overwatch Council to carry out simple and crude oppression of the Ming family, it would certainly cause countless reprisals. The situation in Jiangnan might become turbulent because of this. Jiangnan could not fall into chaos. Once it did, as the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing would be the first to bear the brunt. He would not be able to explain himself to the court and the emperor. Thus, in front of Fan Xian, he could only say he understood and not say anything else. For Fan Xian, the Black Knights were still in Zhongbei. Unless it was the last step, he would not risk the emperor's suspicions and the officials' uproar to move troops into Suzhou. Thus, at this moment, the power he could use was actually not much. To deal with a character like the Ming family, he needed the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing's help, or at least his tacit approval. This was why he had rushed through the night to the governor's manor. Knowing what Xueqing was worried about, Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "Governor, don't worry. Although I am somewhat bold and unrestrained, when I do things, I will follow the rules." Xueqing's heart was slightly at ease. He was not a person on the eldest princess's side, so he was willing to stay out of the battle between the Overwatch Council and the prince. Tonight, the Ming family had sent someone to assassinate the bidding merchant in front of the Jiangnan restaurant. Although everyone knew that the merchant was actually a water bandit, this reality still made this border official feel angry. To be a merchant, one had to have their duties and boundaries. Tonight, the Ming family had crossed the line. Furthermore, the Jiangnan restaurant where the assassination took place was the governor's property. Before the palace treasury's 16 bids have all been decided, I will not act. Fan Xian gazed into Xueqing's eyes and said evenly, "After the day after tomorrow, I will have the Ming family pay the price for this matter. Just let them learn a lesson." Xueqing sighed like an ascetic monk who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind. Fan Xian smiled slightly. He knew that this governor still did not want the matter to become too big. Furthermore, he did not have the extravagant hope that he would be able to knock away a large family that had lasted for hundreds of years within a few days. He said, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Evidence, the most important thing is evidence." Xueqing looked at the young imperial envoy in front of him and couldn't resist opening his mouth to remind him. This matter was not a simple battle between officials and merchants. It was a battle between the powers of the court. If they could not obtain evidence and wanted to cut the Ming family's flesh and blood, it would be very easy for some people in Jingdo to grab hold of Fan Xian's weakness. "In life, there is never a lack of evidence," Fan Xian said calmly. "It is just a lack of eyes to discover evidence. The Overwatch Council's eyes are very bright." These two most powerful officials in Jiangnan talked in secret for a long time. When the two of them could not hide their weariness, only then did Fan Xian take his leave. The situation in Jiangnan was becoming more and more murky. It was like the darkness before dawn. At a glance, one could only see the bottom of the pitch-black abyss. Fan Xian leaned against the back of the carriage seat and fell into a deep sleep. He was completely unaware that the sky outside the carriage was gradually brightening. There were no bells or drums in the morning in Suzhou, but the dawn of spring had already arrived. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 370. The second priest cannot have his hair and beard float. This is my mistake. These days, I have indeed been a bit muddle-headed. Please forgive me. P.S. I still need a monthly ticket. Please don't find it annoying. Although many people did not sleep well that night, many people were busy, and some people did not sleep at all. Furthermore, such a big thing had happened in Suzhou. However, the second day of the Palace Treasury's New Year bidding still arrived as scheduled. This was the rule. This was the usual rule of the court. Thus, even though eunuch Huang and Guojing used Suzhou's tight security and Xia Qifei's assassination attempt as an excuse to ask the transport company to push back the bidding by a few days, Fan Xian still resolutely and valiantly demanded that the bidding begin on time and not be delayed for even a moment. The Ming family had already fought for one night's time. If they were given more time to react, who knew what else would happen? Fan Xian rubbed the sore spot between his brows and forcefully hid the tiredness on his face. He watched the merchants file in. He found that although the expressions of these Jiangnan merchants remained calm, there was still a strange emotion hidden in their eyes. It looked like the matter of Xia Qifei's assassination attempt last night had also brought them great trouble. Fan Xian was temporarily unable to determine whether this change was good or bad for his plan. The Ming father and son were the second-to-last group of people to enter the palace treasury courtyard. Behind them were the long attendants of the clan and the accounts master. With warm expressions, they bowed in all directions. The officials and merchants only gave a perfunctory greeting before moving their gazes away. No one dared to appear too close to the Ming family in front of Fan Xian. When the Ming father and son bowed in front of the main hall, eunuch Huang and Guojing greeted them warmly. It was clear they were expressing their support for each other. Fan Xian watched with cold eyes and nodded with a smile. He then waved his hand for them to sit. Ming Qingda's gaze was very strange. He appeared very calm. It looked like for some reason, he was not afraid of Fan Xian's revenge for the assassination attempt on Xia Qifei last night. Before the main door closed, the Jiangnan water bandits also arrived. Behind Xia Qifei, other than the few old officials of the Ministry of Revenue that Fan Xian had sent, there were only 3 personal guards left. His other brothers had already died on the long street last night. Today, Xia Qifei's face was deathly pale. It seemed that there was no way for him to recover from his serious injuries. However, today's matter was of great importance, so he forced himself to come. Compared to the bandages on his body, the white bandage on his forehead was particularly dazzling and bright. The subordinates behind him also wore white bandages on their foreheads. In this spring, they exuded an icy chill. It was the first time in decades that a mourner had entered the door of the palace treasury. Everyone in the house had their eyes on the bandits from room B4, who were wearing mourning clothes and had a murderous aura around them. The merchants led by the Xiong family of Lingnan and the Sun family of Chuanzhou walked out of their rooms and greeted Xia Qifei, comforting him softly. Supported by his subordinates, Xia Qifei slowly walked to the front of the main hall. He didn't even glance at the father and son of the Ming family in the first room. In a quiet voice, he said, "I still came." Eunuch Hong and Guojing had a strange expression on their faces. The corner of Fan Xian's eye twitched and immediately returned to normal. Calmly, he spread out his right hand and said steadily and firmly, "As long as you come, there will be a place for you here." Everyone understood the meaning of Fan Xian's words. Eunuch Huang and Guojing could not use these words to criticize Fan Xian. The Jiangnan governor, Xueqing, had said he was sick and did not come. Presently, in the large house, Fan Xian's position was the highest. It was clear that Xueqing was letting Fan Xian do as he wished. However, the Ming family's backers would not watch as the entire situation was in Fan Xian's control. Eunuch Huang paused for a moment and then said, "Sir Xia, I heard that the Jianghu fighting broke out again last night in Suzhou. Many of your subordinates have died, however, entering the courtyard in mourning is not proper. After all, Xia Qifei's birth was not honorable. That was why the old matriarch of the Ming family dared to invite the aces of the Juanshan conference to carry out the assassination. After all, if they could kill Xia Qifei, it would solve many problems. Furthermore, they could push the blame onto the Jianghu fighting. Eunuch Huang's words right now were nothing more than an attempt to make this point a reality. Fan Xian felt it was beneath him to bicker with him about these nominal things. However, after hearing Eunuch Huang say entering the courtyard in mourning was not proper, his anger gradually rose. Narrowing his eyes, he said in a quiet voice, "Eunuch Huang, don't make me angry." Although these words were spoken lightly, the voice seemed to have scraped out from a crack in an iceberg and scuttled out from the abyss in the ground. It was so cold and sinister that it made those who heard it tremble in fear. "Don't make me angry." These words burrowed into Eunuch Huang's ears and made the old eunuch involuntarily shiver. He quickly closed his mouth. If he didn't want to be angry with this damned sissy youth, then let him go. In any case, the Ming family had already prepared all night. In a moment, as long as he watched, there wouldn't be any problems. If he let Fan Xian use this opportunity to fly into a rage, who could stop him? It would not be good to ruin everything. To the side, Guo Zheng, who was about to open his mouth, also felt a chill in his heart. He quickly swallowed back the words he was about to say. Last night, they had all thought that Fan Xian would act rashly in his anger. Thus, they had both written memorials and made preparations to grab hold of Fan Xian's weakness. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian had maintained his calm the entire time. It made him and Eunuch Huang very disappointed. They also knew that the evil fire in Fan Xian's heart had been suppressed for a long time. They didn't know when it would explode. Thinking of the ministers and officials who had fallen under Fan Xian's hands, Guo Zheng also retreated. The eldest princess wanted to protect the Ming family's share, not their face. Another explosion rang out. Outside the courtyard of the palace treasury manor, paper flew chaotically, and smoke gradually filled the air. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at this somewhat familiar scene. For some reason, he thought of last year, the day he left Shangjing in northern Qi and the moment he heard the news of Zhuang Mohan's death. On that day, the firecrackers outside Shangjing's gates to send him off seemed to also be sending off Master Zhuang. Were the firecrackers today to send off the people who died last night? Xia Qifei brought his subordinates and walked silently back to room B4. He took off the white ribbon on his head and carefully laid it out on the table in a perfectly straight line. His brothers behind him also followed his eldest brother and took off the white ribbons and laid them out straight. One by one, they were strong and powerful. Fan Xian's brows furrowed imperceptibly. No one knew what he was thinking about. The palace treasury official responsible for announcing once again stood on the stone steps. The palace treasury's second day of bidding officially began. Yesterday, there had been a total of 5 lots. The palace treasury had a total of 16 lots. Other than the last 2 that were tied to 8 lots, there were still 3 lots left to be announced at the very beginning. The Ming family still followed the agreement between the Jiangnan merchants and did not call out a price. On the contrary, it was Xia Qifei who did not seem to be disturbed by the events of last night. Very calmly, he began to bid and took one of the lots. The other 2 were taken by the Lingnan Xiong family and the Hangzhou Chen family. This was probably something that had been discussed at the Jiangnan restaurant last night. The lot that Xia Qifei had taken was still the north route. After Fan Xian received the bid from the flower hall and confirmed that Xia Qifei had taken this lot, he couldn't help but nod his head quietly. Xia Qifei did not let his emotions affect his decisions. This was something he admired. The bidding for these 3 lots proceeded in an ordinary and uneventful manner. The prices were basically the same as in previous years. There was nothing surprising about them. However, none of the merchants and officials present had much of a reaction. Everyone knew that the highlight of the day was at the back. It was in the last 8 lots that the Ming family was determined to win. Goods from the Southeast Road and the Sea Road. 4 lots in total. The bidding begins. The highest bidder wins. The Palace Treasury Transport Company official stood on the stone steps and called out expressionlessly. He didn't know how many years he had been calling out these words. Every year, after these words were called out, only the Ming family would bid. No one would compete with the Ming family. Thus, when he called it out, he felt it was dull and uninteresting. But this year was different. As the call fell, the first to push open the door and hand out the leather envelope was Room B4. Countless voices of discussion rang out in the courtyard. Xia Qifei, the 7th young master rumored to have been abandoned by the Ming family, had finally begun to act against the Ming family. In room A1, Ming Qingda's expression did not change. It was as if he had long expected this situation. In the past few years, because of his family's strength and the eldest princess watching from the back, none of the Jiangnan merchants dared to bid against him. Thus, the Ming family in the last 8 lots was the same as the Cui family in the first 6. They were all playing a one-man show. After playing this kind of show for a long time, one would eventually grow tired of it. Now, someone had finally come to compete with the Ming family. While Ming Qingda felt a slight sense of fear, he also felt a glimmer of excitement. He smiled slightly at his son beside him and said, 20% more, hold him down. Ming Launcher paled in shock. Father meant to say that the first round of bidding would be 20% more than last year's fixed price. If, in a moment, Xia Qifei truly had enough silver in the second round and continued to follow, how could his side hold out? Ming Qingda picked up the teacup beside him and took a sip. Slowly, he said, the extra 20% is not for Xia Qifei, but for someone else. Ming Launcher was confused. He thought to himself, in the palace treasury courtyard, other than Xia Qifei, who had the support of the imperial envoy, who else dared to compete with his family for these 2 big lots? In the heart of this young master of the Ming family, he still firmly believed that Xia Qifei's confidence came from the silver Fan Xian had secretly moved from the Ministry of Revenue. The other people did not have this kind of power. Ming Qingda didn't say anything, but his heart was as clear as a mirror. Fan Xian had Xia Qifei sweep everywhere yesterday. This was to turn the other Jiangnan merchants into hungry wolves, and a hungry wolf dared to take a bite or 2 of anyone's meat. When the 2 leather envelopes were handed into the flower hall, all of the merchants and officials paying attention to this matter dropped their buttocks back to their seats and let out a breath of turbid air. They knew a good show had officially begun. However, it seemed that many people did not guess the direction of this show. The door to room B1 was also slowly pushed open. A leather envelope was handed into the hands of the official in front of the door. The Chuanzhou Sun family. The entire courtyard burst into an uproar. No one had thought that the Chuanzhou Sun family would come to snatch this hot cup of soup when 2 tigers were fighting. The Sun family. Ming Launcher looked at his father in shock. Where did their family get so much silver? Ming Qingda's expression did not change. If the Sun family alone is not enough, can't a few families come together? Don't you think that Xiong Bailing, that old thing, has become much quieter today? And those families that have been watching us this whole time, if they don't have something to hide, why would they watch for so long? It's not like there are flowers growing on my face. In the main hall, the officials sitting in the 3 grand chairs all had their own thoughts. Fan Xian had long expected this development, so he was not very surprised. However, Eunuch Huang and Guojing gritted their teeth. They thought to themselves that the Chuanzhou Sun family was too daring to come out and make trouble at a time like this. Under everyone's nervous gazes, the results of the first round of bidding came out. Fan Xian held the bidding list from the flower hall and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He thought to himself that it was not without reason that the Ming family had been in Jiangnan for so many years. In Fan Xian's plan, the last 4 lots would be when he and the Ming family would do their utmost to raise the price. Although the amount of silver moved over from northern Qi was large, it required too long of a route. In the end, there was still an upper limit. Furthermore, after Xia Qifei had won 5 lots in a row, he had also paid a large amount of money as a deposit. If he could carry out an unlimited fake bid, Xia Qifei could completely call out an empty bid and make the Ming family cough up blood. The problem was, Fan Xian still did not understand Ming Qingda. This nominal master of the Ming family did not seem to be as simple as in name. Fan Xian was unable to determine whether or not Ming Qingda would disregard the eldest prince's strict orders and cleverly cut off his hand if he truly carried out a fake bid. Given the amount of silver in Fan Xian's hands, if he used it to raise the price, he could only be confident that he could heavily injure the Ming family in the second 4 bound lots. If the Ming family really went all out in the 3rd round and let go of these 4 bound lots, if Xia Qifei raised the price too high, there could only be 2 possible outcomes. One was that he would not be able to take out 40% of the deposit, and the other was that after successfully winning the first 4 bound lots, he would have no more strength left and watch as the Ming family effortlessly won the next 4 bound lots. The second outcome was not what Fan Xian wanted. He had no way of controlling the shipping routes to Dongyi, so the 4 bound lots that the Ming family could not do without were of little value to him. He did not want Xia Qifei to actually win this lot, but if he watched as the Ming family so easily won the next 4 bound lots, Fan Xian would not be able to swallow it. As for the first possibility, if the price really exploded, under the watchful eyes of Eunuch Huang and Guojing, under the watchful eyes of so many people, the matter of the palace treasury would truly be for naught, and Xia Qifei would most likely not have a path of survival. In summary, in Fan Xian's earlier plan, the first 4 consecutive bids were to have the Chuanzhou Sun family come out and fire. Xia Qifei's bid was only a feint. He did not plan on risking his life. Looking at the list of bids handed over by the flower hall, Fan Xian knew that the old master of the Ming family had long guessed his plans, so the first round of bids had reached such a terrifying number. The Sun family dared to make a move today because of the message he had sent through Shi Chanli last night. Faced with the Ming family's mountain-like attack, and then thinking of the Ming family brazenly sending people to assassinate Xia Qifei last night, the flames of civil and military fighting each other, Fan Xian began to worry that the Sun family might be scared by this round of bids and not dare to raise the price. The development of the situation was indeed sliding toward a situation Fan Xian did not want to see. When the announcing official yelled out the Ming family's bid of 3.8 million liang of silver, the entire courtyard burst into an uproar. From then on, the door to room B1 never opened again. The Sun family was indeed scared. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at the father and son of the Ming family in room A1. He began to think about whether or not the father and son were truly as the Overwatch Council had found and did not participate much in last night's assassination. The person in charge was purely the old matriarch. Assassinating Xia Qifei seemed rash, but when paired with the ferocious bidding today, it could scare off a number of enemies for the Ming family who wanted to take advantage of the chaos. If Ming Qingda was truly someone who could borrow power and even use his own mother, Fan Xian felt that he needed to re-examine him. After the first round of bids came out, Eunuch Huang and Guojing stroked their beards and smiled. However, Eunuch Huang did not have a beard on his chin, so he appeared comical. At least it could be seen that the two of them were satisfied with the Ming family's move and everyone's reaction. Room B4 was quiet. Through the window lattice, Xia Qifei glanced at Fan Xian with an inquiring gaze. Fan Xian sighed somewhat helplessly and used the palms of his hands to smooth the flying hair at his temples. The meaning of this secret signal was for Xia Qifei to slowly plan. Since the Sun family had backed out, Xia Qifei had to continue bidding. However, he had to control his bidding well. He had to make the Ming family feel pain, but he couldn't be too ruthless. He also had to make the other party take over the first 4 consecutive bids with satisfaction and not suddenly give up and throw these 4 consecutive bids to him. This was a difficult situation. Even if Xia Qifei had the help of a few old officials of the Ministry of Revenue behind him, it was still difficult to deal with it flawlessly. The announcing official once again stood on the stone steps. This happened twice. The anticipated great family battle between the eldest and 7th brother of the Ming family did not happen. The bandits in room B4 completely lost the ferocity of yesterday and carefully bid. Although they were cautious, the price of the first 4 consecutive bids was still slowly raised to a jaw-dropping level. This was, of course, because the Ming family's first round bid was 20% higher than last year's. Another reason was that room B4 was like a sticky candy clinging to the other party. In the end, the successful bidder was still the Ming family. This result was the same as it had been for many years. However, the price they bid was very different from previous years. 12 million liang. Everyone's mouths were wide open as they listened to this price. They thought to themselves that if the palace treasury bidding rule was 5 rounds, Xia Qifei in room B4 and Ming Qingda in room A1 would probably raise this price to twice last year's price. This price was indeed ridiculously high. Fan Xian knew that this could only mean that in previous years, under the eldest princess' control, the price of marketing rights had been ridiculously low. At this price, the Ming family would not lose out. Perhaps they would even make a large profit. Of course, this was only if the Ming family still dared to do the pirate business and still dared to smuggle goods into Dongyi under Fan Xian's eyes. Thus, Fan Xian smiled and was very satisfied with this result. The Ming family was just waiting to throw money into this bid this year. Room A1, Ming family, 12 million liang, win. The Palace Treasury Transport Company announcer, who had been listless the entire time, announced the largest bid in the dozen years the Palace Treasury had been open for bidding. He finally became spirited. The voice of the bid was powerful and powerful. The word win left his mouth and disappeared without delay. It appeared very straightforward. No matter what attitude the merchants had toward the Ming family, they all felt a glimmer of excitement and cheered for this number. On the contrary, the father and son of the Ming family in room A1 did not have any joy on their faces, particularly Ming Qingda, who had a faint worry between his brows. What he was thinking was the same as what Fan Xian was thinking. If they didn't have some shady methods to help them, this 4 consecutive bids would definitely be lost. Most importantly, Xia Qifei seemed to have the help of an expert when he called out his bid, and he had a good grasp of the situation. This bid was 5,120,000 taels of silver, and just the deposit alone would cost him more than 2 million taels of silver. Moreover, the other party's real bid would definitely be at the end. Last night, Ming Garden had gathered silver overnight. In total, the 6 branches had only gathered 600,000 liang. It was far from the 1.35 million liang the old Ming matriarch had set. Furthermore, this 4 consecutive bids had already exceeded Ming Qingda's mental budget by too much. What should they do next? There was still half of Taiping Money House's silver tribute left, but no one knew what would happen next. Ming Qingda's hands gently pressed on the wooden box beside him, deep in thought. Ming Launcher glanced at his tired father and felt his heart ache. He knew that his father had not slept at all last night. He had gone through the night to a few large money houses in Suzhou to transfer silver. It was not until the early hours of the morning that he finally received the amount he could be at ease with. Inside this box was the banknote that Zhaoshang Money House had hastily opened. "Do you think the Imperial Envoy still wants the 4 consecutive bids?" Ming Qingda sighed tiredly. Ming Launcher didn't know what to say. The sun had moved, and the palace treasury bidding temporarily came to an end. The bailiffs of the Suzhou government and the transport company brought in food for the various officials and merchants to eat. Although the food provided by the government was not as good as the food in the homes of these wealthy people, these merchants still ate with relish. They gathered around the dispirited Chuanzhou's Sun family and asked about something. Everyone was looking forward to the afternoon. That was the final battle. In the morning, the terrifying amount of 5 million liang of silver had already been opened. How dazzling would the afternoon be? No one noticed that Ming Qingda silently walked into the main hall and came to the side hall where the major figures were eating. He did not avoid arousing suspicion and smiled slightly. "Greetings, Eunuch Huang, Imperial Censor Gua. I have some things I want to report to the Imperial Envoy. I hope the two of you will make things easier for me." Eunuch Huang and Guozheng were startled, thinking, "What game is this? Does the Ming family want to lean toward Fan Xian in front of their faces?" But it was impossible for him to be so open and aboveboard. Ming Qingda had controlled the Ming family for a long time and had many dealings with the officials in court. He had a sense of authority. Eunuch Huang and Guozheng met each other's eyes and deeply trusted him. They smiled and retreated, leaving him and Fan Xian space to talk. There was no one in the hall. Ming Qingda lifted the front of his robe with some difficulty and knelt in front of Fan Xian. He did not speak. Fan Xian held a bowl in one hand and chopsticks in the other. He was searching between the dishes for something delicious to eat. His gaze did not even glance in that direction. He only said, "The 4 consecutive bids at the back. We'll still fight for them. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 371. Fan Xian's chopsticks dug around in the plate. He picked up a piece of beef soaked in sesame oil and placed it on top of the white rice. He slowly brought it to his lips and chewed carefully, savoring it. He still did not pay any attention to Ming Qingda kneeling to the side. Ming Qingda was not a simple character. The meaning this kneeling represented was also not that simple. Fan Xian needed time to think. After he finished thinking, he gently put down his bowl and chopsticks and said, "Old Master Ming, you are much older than me. How can I accept this?" The Imperial Envoy's hands were empty and powerless, but Ming Qingda had to stand. The conversation between officials and merchants began very calmly and steadily. Fan Xian gazed at him and said, "What is the old master prepared to explain? What kind of explanation could be exchanged for the lives of Fan Xian's subordinates? What would it take for Fan Xian to let the Ming family go?" Ming Qingda did not know and did not need to know. Everything he needed was for Fan Xian to temporarily let the Ming family go and buy the necessary buffer time for his family and Jingdou. Right now, the situation was too unclear. Even if he was prepared to be a grass on the wall, he still had to know where the wind was coming from. He was only begging for his stance to be able to make the Imperial Envoy loosen his grip slightly. To make the Imperial Envoy believe him, he also had a strong desire to lean toward his side. Fan Xian did not wait for the scheming and far-sighted old master to reply and said, "Your heart is not sincere, so there is no need to surrender." Ming Qingda's expression was calm, but he sighed and said, "The imperial envoy cannot believe me." "It is not that I cannot believe you," Fan Xian lowered his head and said. "Even you can't trust yourself. You've been on that boat for too long. To come down is very difficult. You should know this very well. If you are still on that boat, the other people on the boat will always have to ensure your safety. If you come to my boat, what about the goods you left on the original boat?" Naturally, this goods was not the goods they were talking about. Ming Qingda also knew this in his heart. Hearing Fan Xian's words, he knew it was impossible to convince this young imperial envoy. With a trace of tiredness, he self-mockingly begged, "Please show me the way." Fan Xian's gaze continued to linger on the delicacies on the table. After a moment of thought, he quietly said, "You have many brothers. Recently, I heard that Master Xia of Room B4 is also your brother." Ming Qingda's expression did not change, but his heart began to ache. The Ming family had followed Fan Xian's enemy for too long. If he wanted Fan Xian to truly believe that the Ming family was willing to lean toward him, he had to be confident he could completely control the Ming family in his hands. Xia Qifei was clearly a pawn Fan Xian was using to control the Ming family. If it had been anyone else, Fan Xian would not have accepted this agreement. Fan Xian's words were, without a doubt, giving his own conditions. However, Ming Qingda could not accept these conditions no matter what. Putting aside the fact that Ming Qingda could not let go of his family business, just thinking of Xia Qifei's icy gaze and the wretched whip marks under his clothes, his heart began to twist. In the present situation, the one attacking was the Overwatch Council, and the one defending was the Ming family. Furthermore, the Ming family was retreating step by step. Today, the price increase in the palace treasury was only the first link in a chain of events. Following events followed one after another, and the Ming family was in a precarious position. Only now did Ming Qingda realize that this seemingly young imperial envoy was actually so conservative, cautious, severe, and sinister in his bones. Faced with such a large temptation, he was not moved at all. Only now did he realize that what Fan Xian wanted was far more than he could pay. It was not just 400,000 liang. It was not just the Ming family's secret cooperation in Jiangnan from now on. It was a somewhat arrogant and incomparably arrogant desire for complete control of the palace treasury's production and sales. "Please give me a way out," Ming Qingda said with a pained smile. Earlier, they were talking about a clear path. Now, they could only talk about a way out. If the last 4 bids continue like this, the tens of thousands of disciples in the family, as well as the countless servants hired around, will probably not be able to feed the family next year. The Ming family does not lack silver. Fan Xian looked at the master of the Ming family in front of him and admired him more and more. It was clearly threatening him, yet he said it so gently and lowly. It was not harsh at all. On the contrary, it was filled with comfort. In a moment, the last 4 bids, just pretend that the Ming family has spat out the silver they swallowed a few years ago. He tilted his head slightly and narrowed his eyes as he examined the slightly dispirited Ming Qingda. In his heart, he endlessly guessed what this master of the Ming family was planning. "You should know my past. I do not appreciate your methods of selling things in the past. Of course, I am not an unreasonable bandit. As long as you do things more reliably, naturally, I will also be more reliably." The so-called reliably referred to last night's matter. Fan Xian used the tip of his chopsticks to knock against the edge of the porcelain plate, making a crisp clanging sound. In the end, he said, "Hold the bowl like a dragon spitting out pearls, use chopsticks like a phoenix nodding its head, eat until you're 80% full, if you can't finish, take it away. Being a person and doing things is the same as eating. Your posture must be beautiful, and you must know your limits. This is good. Ming Qingde knew that he would not be able to make any more progress in front of this imperial envoy. Hearing Fan Xian's last words, his heart relaxed slightly. Although he could not believe it completely, he absolutely believed that Fan Xian did not have any intention of forcing the Ming family to collapse. He still wanted to control the Ming family and not destroy it. To control the enormous Ming family. Xia Qifei could not do it, his mother could not do it, only he could. Ming Qingde had this confidence. Thus, in a moment, he would certainly vomit blood because of the last 4 bids. In his heart, he knew that in the days to come, he would still have to discuss things with the imperial envoy. Merchants were least afraid of discussing things. Haggling was their forte. Ming Qingde bowed respectfully to Fan Xian again and retreated. Looking at the slightly hunched and slightly aged back of the master of the Ming family, Fan Xian once again gently placed his chopsticks on the table and narrowed his eyes slightly. Up until now, he still could not see through Ming Qingde's depths. The meaning behind that kneel earlier was too rich. Admit defeat. Ask for peace. Surrender. Make up for last night's matter. If the Ming family truly intended to lean toward him, then the palace treasury's open and aboveboard situation was, on the contrary, the best place to show their true intentions. The problem was, Fan Xian did not believe that this old man would willingly surrender. He had not played all of his cards, and the Ming family was not at the end of their rope. The painful price that the big tree, which was used to standing on the other side of the river, wanted to be uprooted and moved to this side of the river. It should not be something that the Ming family was willing to pay right now. Why would the other party put on such a lowly posture? He still had the old matriarch above him. Which side the Ming family should lean toward was a major matter that concerned the future of tens of thousands of people in the clan. Ming Qingde should not have the power to make an arbitrary decision. Furthermore, this kneel was not hidden. Someone should have already seen it and would immediately spread. Fan Xian's eyes narrowed even more. Was the other party preparing to play the tragic card? In this world that had not yet produced someone like Bian, perhaps tragic was a feasible move. However, purposely kneeling in front of everyone, how tragic could that be? If it had been any other official, faced with the inclination that Ming Qingde displayed, they would certainly be secretly happy. Only Fan Xian did not think this way. Just as Ming Qingde had expected, he wanted too many things that the Ming family could not afford to give. Furthermore, he had prepared for this matter for a long time. He had the confidence to swallow the Ming family and not accept their surrender. Since Fan Xian could swallow the Ming family at any time, then why should he haggle with the Ming family to obtain their surrender? It was not that he did not want to, it was not that he could not, it was that he disdained it. The cool breeze passed through the door and blew away the remnants of the aroma of food in the courtyard of the palace treasury. It also blew away a sliver of the scent of firecrackers. Only the heavy atmosphere remained unmoved. Tension permeated the courtyard. It was like thousand-year-old ice, like a giant rock at the bottom of a river, difficult to melt in the spring wind, and difficult to move in the great river. The voice of the transport company official in charge of the ceremony had already become hoarse. It wasn't because he spoke too much, nor was it because he drank too little water, but because he was nervous. The merchants who lived along Corridor A and Corridor B could no longer sit still. Separated by the open door lattice, they stood on the high sill of the door and stared nervously outside. In the afternoon, it was the bidding of the palace treasury's last 4 lots. After 2 rounds of bidding, no one cheered. No one even wiped the cold sweat from their foreheads. The Chuanzhou Sun family, who had been scared off by the Ming family in the morning, listened to the price with a deathly pale face. Their eyes were lifeless as they looked outside. They had been scared again by the 2 madmen. All of the merchants felt that today's trip had broadened their horizons. At the same time, they had received a great shock. That was silver, that was silver. Why did the Ming family of room A1 and the Xia family of room B4 dare to throw it out like that? Could it be that in their eyes, those thick banknotes were no different from waste paper? Xiong Bailing of the Lingnan Xiong family looked outside with bloodshot eyes. He didn't quite believe his ears. He said to the accountant beside him, "Did the announcer make a mistake just now?" The accountant of the Xiong family wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. How could the numbers calculated by the flower hall be wrong? Dear heavens, a few of Master Xiao's brothers were killed yesterday. Today, he began to go crazy. The Ming family has also gone crazy. The old Ming master is not a bandit. Xiong Bailing was so nervous that he didn't have time to swallow his saliva. He choked in the middle and almost stumbled. With a flip of his hand, he snatched the teacup from a subordinate's hand and gulped it down. Lowering his voice, he scolded, "Xia Qifei is the 7th Ming master. I think the two of them are fighting for real, brothers fighting against the wall. It is really exciting. It looks like the Ming family are all crazy in their bones." Not only was the announcer's voice trembling, but the Jiangnan merchants were sweating incessantly. Even the three masters sitting in the main hall were beginning to become nervous. Hearing the second round of bids, Eunuch Huang and Guozheng looked at each other. Their faces became deathly white. The two of them had never thought that the last 4 consecutive bids of the palace treasury bidding would be driven up by Fan Xian and the Ming family to such a terrifying level. The Ming family was set to lose money on these 4 consecutive bids, and it would be a huge loss. For Eunuch Huang and Guozheng, the Ming family's income would decrease, and the amount of money that Jiangnan would send to the capital, which could not see the light of day, would also be less, too much. Thinking of this, the gazes the two of them stared at Fan Xian with a bit of hatred. Although Fan Xian used his powerful state of mind to maintain the calm expression on his face, if one was attentive, they would still be able to see that the stiff and starched cuffs of the imperial envoy's purple official robe were slightly trembling. His thin and delicate lips were pressed together tightly, and there was a slight redness under his earlobes. After all, a scene like the one today was rarely seen. The Qing emperor was known as the wealthiest person in the world, but Fan Xian was willing to bet that the Qing emperor, who had never entered the Ministry of Revenue's treasury, had never seen so many banknotes floating around in the air with the announcer's raspy and trembling voice. 5 million liang of silver. 10 years after the founding of the Qing kingdom, the entire nation's financial taxes added together would only amount to 10 million liang. Even for the Qing kingdom, which was now at its peak, such a large amount of silver was still an inconceivable number. If this 10 million liang of silver was used to buy death soldiers in Jiangnan, it was enough to destroy the small vassal states around Dongyi with the wave of a hand. It was enough to become a tyrant. Such a large amount of silver, how many beauties could it be exchanged for? How many warhorses and weapons could it be forged? If it was all invested in the people's livelihood, how many li of dikes could it build? How many pots of porridge could it cook? How many halls could it open? How many people could it save? And, if it was all changed to silver ingots, how many people could it crush to death? The 5 million liang in the morning was already the highest price in the history of the palace treasury. In the afternoon, it easily broke the record, particularly in the second round of bidding. The Ming family had called out a price that broke 10 million liang. This not only broke the record, but it also broke through everyone's psychological defenses. The reason for such a result was, of course, due to the Ming family's current situation of being besieged both internally and externally, as well as the large amount of gold and silver Fan Xian had borrowed from the northern Qi emperor. The Ming family had to fight for this bid, but Xia Qifei had the ability to hedge against it. All of these factors added together to create such a terrifying number. Fan Xian drank a mouthful of cold tea and forcefully suppressed the emotions in his heart. He made a very secretive hand gesture. All right, let's stop here. Rest, rest. It was not until now that Fan Xian gradually understood Ming Qingda's thoughts, the emperor's thoughts, and many people's thoughts. When Ming Qingda was fighting for the bid, he obediently followed Fan Xian's plan. For one, he was under pressure from Xinyang. For another, his thoughts were somewhat mysterious. Either way, he was just giving away silver. If he called out a low price, a portion of the silver he earned would have to be given to Xinyang. If he called out a high price, it was the same as giving the silver to the palace treasury, which was also the same as giving it to the emperor and Fan Xian. Ming Qingda saw things very accurately. He saw that the court needed his silver, so he decided to be ruthless. He wanted to throw out half of his family business. In this way, he won the bid and also suited Fan Xian's wishes. He didn't offend a single person on either side that he couldn't offend. It was a pity that he had offended money. With so much gold and silver, who knew how many years it would take for the Ming family to recover? The so-called spending money to get rid of disasters, the silver the Ming family used to get rid of disasters this time was truly going all in. In Fan Xian's view, the Ming family's economic strength had truly reached a terrifying level. The Qing emperor would not allow such an existence to grow. He would either weaken them or destroy them. This was the emperor's true intention in having Fan Xian go to Jiangnan. Ming Qingda also clearly grasped this intention. However, Shen Wansan had still died back then. Could the Ming family survive? This was something that happened later. Even Fan Xian had no way of completely controlling it. However, Fan Xian felt that the Ming family's performance was very useful. Thus, he made a hand gesture to have Xia Qifei stop bidding. It was not the mischief of a small farmer's mind, nor was it because he felt pity. Rather, Fan Xian knew that the old Ming master's act was certainly not over. 11,500,000 liang of silver was already enough. Fan Xian did not wish for too much discussion in court and bring too many negative evaluations to himself. Seeing the bandit in room B4 stop bidding, everyone, including the officials and merchants, did not feel regret or anger at not being able to watch the show. On the contrary, they all let out a breath at the same time, feeling as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. The bidding this afternoon had been too terrifying. That number was too sensitive. The merchants did not want to cause something bad to happen. The officials also did not want the situation to be dragged to an explosive level. In the Flower Hall, the joint examination officials of the Ministry of Revenue and the Palace Treasury began to carry out intense examination work. In the end, they confirmed this bid. They used a red brush to carefully and nervously write the final report and handed it to the front hall. The officiating official walked to the stone steps and swallowed a mouthful of saliva to moisten his hoarse and burning throat. In a trembling voice, he said, "Goods from the Southeast Road and Sea Road, for consecutive bids, Room A1, Ming family, 11. 5 million liang." Yes. No one cheered or cried out. Everyone wanted to quickly escape the palace treasury courtyard and get as far away from this number as possible. "Father! Father!" It was at this moment that a cry of surprise came from room A1, which was closest to the main hall. For a moment, everyone stood up from their chairs in shock. Looking in that direction, they didn't know what had happened to the Ming family. "Father! What happened to you? Someone come! Someone come! Quickly come and save him!" From room A1, young Master Ming Launcher's panicked cry for help rang out. Amidst the chaotic sounds, the officials quickly pushed open the door and entered. Only then did they find that the master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, had fainted on the ground with an ashen face. Regardless of whether it was the officials or the merchants, they all thought they knew what had happened. Everyone thought that the master of the Ming family had been pressured from inside and outside to forcefully snatch these 4 consecutive bids and had been forced to bid a sky-high price. Thinking that the Ming family might decline because of this sky-high price, the old Ming master was so anxious that he fell unconscious. Everyone knew who had forced the Ming family into such a wretched situation. Thus, the gazes of everyone in the courtyard unconsciously turned toward the imperial envoy standing on the stone steps. Fan Xian was not very shocked. He narrowed his eyes and scolded, "What are you panicking about? Quickly seal the treasury and deposit the silver. After the process is over, quickly send the old Ming master to see a doctor." There was a whole set of procedures for opening and closing the palace treasury. There was also a lot of banknotes in the courtyard, so it took some time before the unconscious old Ming master was carried out. He was moved into the Ming family carriage that Fan Xian had specially allowed to drive to the front door and headed straight for the doctor. No one had expected that the lively palace treasury bidding, after consecutively setting a few records and provoking countless dangers, would have such a bleak and light ending. Watching the Ming family's carriage depart into the distance and thinking of the unknown fate of the master of the Ming family, the Jiangnan merchants couldn't help but sigh endlessly. A glimmer of sympathy grew in their hearts. The people of the Ming family left first. After the merchants went through the inspection, they also left the palace treasury courtyard. What remained were all officials who began to carry out the final finishing touches of the palace treasury. Since it was a business of selling money, naturally, the work of counting the 40% deposit silver banknotes was the most important. The 3 important figures stood in the flower hall and watched as the Ministry of Revenue and Transport Company officials entered the books and sealed the banknotes. Fan Xian looked at the Ming family's final 4 million liang deposit. At the bottom was a thick stack of banknotes from Zhaoshang Money House. His eyes narrowed slightly and knew that the matter had finally been completed. Originally, in the plan, the last 4 consecutive bids would force the Ming family to use the banknotes from Zhaoshang Money House. Fan Xian would purposely make things difficult for them. After all, Zhaoshang's credibility was not as good as Tianxia's. At that time, Eunuch Huang and Guozheng would certainly speak up for the Ming family. Thus, Fan Xian would be able to remove himself even more cleanly. However, he had not thought that Ming Qingda would do things so straightforwardly and efficiently. Fan Xian was too lazy to smear the small details. However, in the end, Ming Qingda fainted. Keep pretending. Fan Xian smiled coldly in his heart, but his face carried a sympathetic expression. He sighed to Eunuch Huang beside him and said, "The Ming family won the bid with great difficulty. However, the old Ming master is still old and unable to withstand such joy. Instead, he fainted. It is best if this happy event doesn't become a funeral." Eunuch Huang, who was currently rubbing his fingers and drooling as he looked at the banknotes, still a little nervous, heard the imperial envoy's words. In his shock, he almost broke his fingers. He opened his mouth to curse, but he didn't dare. He thought to himself, what kind of person would make such sarcastic remarks after playing with someone? Eunuch Huang huffed angrily and didn't say anything. Guozheng smiled insincerely and said, "This year, the palace treasury's income is a full 80% higher than in previous years. When this gets back to Jingdo, the emperor will certainly reward Sir Fan Jr. greatly. In the future, becoming a king or marquis is just around the corner." Given Fan Xian's identity and the power he currently held, becoming a king or marquis in the future was a sure thing. He also didn't want to listen to Guozheng's flattery. He smiled coldly and said, "It's all thanks to all of you and the Jiangnan merchants who sympathize with the court. They would rather lose their hard-earned capital to supplement the palace treasury. As for me, in this matter, I did not play much of a role." Guozheng was stifled. He thought to himself, the Ming family almost sold their pants today. Wasn't it all because of you? And you still have the face to say I didn't play much of a role. He huffed coldly and didn't say anything else. He only cursed endlessly in his heart. Pretend, keep pretending. Monthly tickets, come quick. Chapter 372. Ha, I'm not pretending, and no one punished me to kneel on the CPU or hit me with a stick. Monthly votes are a bonus. If I have them, I will be happy. My attitude in this area is so good that it angers both men and gods. Really, keep pulling for votes. Xia Mingji, it's so scary. Do you know how the copper wire the great prince pulled when he killed Huma was invented? Isn't that made of iron? The difference isn't that big, did you know? To be honest, Northern Qi really did not have such a thing. The Northern Qi ruler and officials were most interested in the military products of the Qin Kingdom Palace Treasury's 3 workshops. It was not easy for one side of the conversation to bring this up. The girl on the other side felt a glimmer of joy and said sincerely, I don't know. Oh, copper wire is very difficult to pull, the warm and gentle voice sighed. The gentle voice sighed and said, I heard that the merchants in Jiangnan were fighting for a piece of copper coin, and they pulled it out by force. The joke itself was amusing, but coming from his mouth, it seemed rather cold. So, the girl only quirked her lips. He then asked, do you know how the tunnel from Sha Lake to the river in Shazhou was dug? The girl shook her head. She didn't really want to play with him on these things. The person shook his head and said, because Jiangnan merchants dropped a copper coin into a rat hole on the dam. Haitang looked at Fan Xian, who was telling a joke. She looked at him quietly for a long time before saying, I can understand these 2 jokes. I just don't know what you're trying to say. Fan Xian scratched at his slightly itchy and painful neck. Cici had not been in good spirits these 2 days. Every day, when she combed her hair, she used too much force and pulled too hard at the back of her head, so there were some red spots. As he scratched, he said, these 2 jokes tell us that for merchants, being stingy is always a virtue worthy of praise, and profit is always an irresistible temptation. These were 2 jokes he had heard about Jews in his previous life. Using them on Jiangnan merchants at this time was not too strange. He turned around and pointed at his back to Haitang. Just now, he had scratched himself, but the area of the itch had quickly expanded. It had immediately run to the center of the heavenly assassin's back. Although Fan Xian's little tricks could easily dig there with his palm, it didn't feel good. So he pointed at his vest. Haitang glared at him, but her hand had already reached out, gently scratching his back through his clothes. Feeling the miraculous hand that could easily defeat the second priest using a supreme heart to scratch his itch, Fan Xian felt his entire body relax. He gave a comfortable moan and continued, being stingy is the nature of merchants. Ming Qingda being so willing to cut his own flesh is a bit unexpected. Furthermore, this matter concerns profits. Next year, I will certainly have to appease the Sun family of Chuanzhou and the merchants who lost out this year, so I will have to trouble you to tell your emperor that at most next year, I will be able to maintain this year's share. Any more will be difficult. Haitang nodded. Immediately after, she continued to ask, how are you going to deal with the Ming family? It looks like you are very satisfied with Ming Qingda's attitude. Fan Xian shook his head and said seriously, his attitude does not completely represent the Ming family's attitude. The matter of that night has not ended, and I cannot stop. The Ming family's current injuries are all on the economy. In the next year, just by relying on the palace treasury shipping goods to block him, I can make his family continue to bleed, but the Ming family's entire body is still relatively healthy. If I want to eat them all in one bite, it is impossible. Thus, as long as I am in Jiangnan, I will go every few days to cut a piece of flesh. Perhaps this was the so-called nibbling away. However, as Haitang listened, she couldn't help feeling sorrow for Ming Qingda. The old Ming master had put on a low profile, but he still had no way of controlling the execution of Fan Xian's valiant plan. Seeming to guess what she was thinking, Fan Xian explained, "The Ming family will certainly not sit and wait for death. The problem is, the plan set by Xiaoyan this time is not the same as dealing with the Cui family. The Overwatch Council's methods are all methods that can be seen. Everything I am doing is completely in accordance with Qing law. This is not a conspiracy, it is an open plot." Faced with the difference in strength, the Ming family cannot carry out a direct counterattack. Don't think that Ming Qingda is purely trying to keep the peace. He is also wasting time and waiting for the situation in the capital to change. He emphasized his tone and said, "For the Ming family, the situation in Jingdou must change. Otherwise, they can only wait to be eaten up by the court." Haitang continued in a quiet voice, "Thus, you won't let them continue to wait peacefully. Instead, you have to do your best to weaken their strength before the situation in Jingdou changes." "Correct," Fan Xian said expressionlessly. "Everything will be done according to the rules. My only worry is that the Ming family's reputation is so good that it is difficult to understand. I can't find any problems in the Palace Treasury Transport Company accounts. The other party's ability to smooth out traces is too powerful. Presently, there has been no more news from that island. It seems that someone is helping them cover it up. Faced with such a seemingly gentle and virtuous large family, if I, or the Overwatch Council, push the Ming family too hard and the Ming family puts on an overly pitiful attitude, perhaps the Jiangnan scholars and people will retaliate." "You are not a person who cares about other people's discussions," Haitang said with a smile. Fan Xian also smiled. "These words are true. However, even if I don't care, it doesn't mean the emperor doesn't care. The emperor wants to leave his name in history and also wants his power to be permanent. This has always been a troublesome matter. If it wasn't because of this, the court would have too many ways to directly flatten the Ming family. Why hasn't it done anything yet? Isn't it because they are afraid of leaving an impression in people's hearts that the emperor is heartless and the court is sinister? They are afraid of leaving a dishonorable mark in the history books. Is the Qing emperor this kind of person?" Haitang asked with confusion. "Believe me," Fan Xian forced a smile and said. "The emperor is indeed a person who cares about his reputation. Otherwise, when the heavens sent an auspicious sign last time, he wouldn't have had to fight with your emperor for that breath of air. This time, the emperor sent me down to Jiangnan to subdue the Ming family. Of course, he hopes that I can do it beautifully and trample the Ming family to death without leaving behind any bad reputation. If, at that time, the people of Jiangnan and even under heaven all feel injustice for the Ming family, if those powers in Jingdou make another ruckus, even if the emperor is heartless enough to let me be a black dog, he will still be forced to summon me back to the capital. Since it is so, today is already the 4th day after the palace treasury bidding. Why haven't you done anything?" Haitang asked curiously. Fan Xian smiled and said, "Who says I haven't done anything? I have put in a lot of thought into the Baoyue brothel matter." Speaking of Baoyue brothel, Haitang felt a bit strange. She sighed and said, "It's one thing for you to borrow silver from me to repair the river works, but the silver of the Qi kingdom, you're using it to open a brothel. If this news gets back to Shangjing, I'm afraid the emperor will laugh me to death." Fan Xian knew that this northern Qi saint girl always felt uncomfortable about him opening a brothel. He said seriously, "The river works are a good deed. As you know, the work I am about to begin settling down the refugees is also a good deed. In reality, you don't know that opening a brothel is also a good deed." Haitang was very confused. What did a brothel forcing women to do such pitiful things have to do with doing a good deed? Humanity's two oldest professions, one is an assassin, and the other is a prostitute. Fan Xian snapped his fingers and pointed at his back, indicating for Haitang not to stop scratching his back. You can't change this. I can't change it. Even my mother can't change it. Since it is so, this business will certainly continue to exist forever. Then, we might as well take control of this business in our own hands and set down some procedures to do our best to protect the interests of those pitiful women. Fan Xian first said Gulong's famous words and then repeated the words he had used to convince Shi Chonli. Then, he solemnly concluded, I open a brothel to protect those prostitutes. If I blindly place morality above my head and ignore it, cover my eyes and pretend there is no such thing in this world, then that is truly not having a benevolent heart and not treating those prostitutes as people. When Fan Xian specifically talked about the various new policies of Baoyue brothel, such as doctors and monthly leave, Haitang's hand that was tickling Fan Xian had already stopped. She looked at the back of his head with slight shock. It was as if she had not thought that what Fan Xian said was not empty lies and that he was actually doing these things. When she heard the last sentence, the admiration on Haitang's face was immediately hidden. In a quiet voice, she said, and Ji's words make sense. Fan Xian turned his head in surprise. He had not expected her to reply so seriously. This was not a good feeling. It was as if Su Jiling was persuading a nun. He shook his head and chased this sad and sorrowful association out of his mind. Without rhyme or reason, he said, Duo, I'm sorry. This time, it was Haitang's turn to make a sound of surprise and agreement. Fan Xian said, a few days ago, you and I separated a bit. After the matter, I thought about it. This is mainly my problem. Of course, there is also your problem. But, in the end, it is my problem. Although Haitang did not really understand what he wanted to say, nor did she understand the strange sentence pattern that took up too many words and filled with rubbish, she could still easily connect it to the old road outside Shangjing in northern Qi. The young man in front of her had once said something about the sun at 8 or 9 o'clock. The world was yours and mine. A faint smile rose to the corners of her lips. Fan Xian clapped his hands and stared into her eyes. I crave honesty between friends, but I am not honest enough with you. So, this is my problem. Ever since you left northern Qi and came to Jiangnan, you have to stare at so much silver every day and worry about how I will be. The pressure on you is too great, making it hard for your state of mind to calm. You are not as good as you were in the beginning and cannot successfully resolve this pressure. This is your problem. But, you have pressure, I have pressure. In the end, this pressure is caused by me, so this problem is also mine. Haitang smiled and covered her mouth, only revealing a pair of eyes as bright as a clear lake. Fan Xian was slightly startled and unconsciously said, your eyes are pretty. There was a third between the two of them. Fan Xian chuckled and said, I didn't think you would have a little girl's side, but, in the end, you still haven't told me how old you are. Seeing Haitang's slightly angry expression, he noncommittally waved his hand and said, change the topic. Didn't you just ask why you haven't made a move against the Ming family these 2 days? You said you were busy with the brothel's renovation work. Haitang also knew how to joke, but it was a bit shaky. Fan Xian nodded and smiled. That is one thing. Of course, the most important problem is I am waiting for Xia Qifei to recover. On the evening of March 26th, in the area west of Suzhou where salt merchants and royal merchants gathered, red lanterns hung high and firecrackers rang out. It was a joyous atmosphere. The Jiangnan Water Bandits commander Xia Qifei, who had been in the limelight during the palace treasury matter, had officially bought a courtyard in Suzhou. Today was the first time he had opened his doors to welcome guests. In reality, the true wealthy of Jiangnan all had their own large courtyards outside of Suzhou in the Jiangnan water villages. They usually lived in their own manors and rarely stayed in the city. However, each of their families had a luxurious residence in the western part of Suzhou because this was a symbol of status and a display of the family's power. The land in the west of the city was very expensive. Furthermore, no one was willing to sell property, so not everyone had the right to live there. Xia Qifei was able to successfully open his own courtyard. This meant that after the palace treasury matter, Jiangnan had already recognized his right. Of course, Xia Qifei, who had moved into Suzhou, had to wash himself clean and not leave a trace of evil on his face. Thus, he could not move in as the commander of the Jiangnan water bandits. His current identity had already changed. He had become the owner of Xiaomingji. Xiaomingji was also a newly opened business. The meaning hidden in the name was clear to the merchants who had come to congratulate them. The Ming family was very eye-catching. However, they didn't know whether or not the Ming family would send someone today. They heard that after the master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, fainted that day, it took him a whole 2 days to wake up. His body was very weak. A carriage stopped in front of the Xia Manor. The carriage was completely black and did not have any emblems. However, the guards staring at it like tigers watching their prey, as well as the sudden increase of strangers on the street, all made clear the identity of this carriage. The merchant surrounding the door of the Xia Manor quickly walked over and bowed toward the carriage. They then eagerly prepared to welcome the person in the carriage. Inside the carriage, Fan Xian said to the third prince in an even voice, "Your Highness, do you really want to join in on the excitement? It doesn't seem very appropriate." The third prince smiled sweetly and said, "I know what teacher is worried about. However, since teacher is not avoiding suspicion today to help Xia Qifei, adding one more student is nothing." Fan Xian smiled. He knew that this little guy had not forgotten Iguipin's teachings at all times. Regardless of life or death, he would be tied to him. Not only psychologically, but also in public opinion. One big and one small, the two nobles of Suzhou reservedly got off the carriage. It drew a clamor and rising of cheers from outside the carriage. Fan Xian stood in the room and used his hand to touch the clearly newly made study table. Smelling the faint scent of clear wood, he thought to himself that this world was nothing special, but the newly renovated house did not have the smell of methane. This benefit was enough. Suddenly, his heart jumped. He realized that it had been a long time since he had thought of the things of his original world. He didn't know what this meant. Perhaps he was getting more and more used to this world, but why was there an unknown desire in his heart that kept scratching and making his heart itch? He didn't know what exactly he was longing for. It wasn't tobacco, it wasn't porn, he didn't know what it was. He shook off his daze and found that Xia Qifei and the third prince were both staring at him in a daze. He couldn't help smiling self-mockingly and saying, "Qingqing, you're injured. Sit by yourself and don't mind me. I often zone out." Knowing that the imperial envoy and the third prince had arrived together, the Jiangnan merchants who had come to the front yard to offer their congratulations were all secretly envious of Xia Qifei's luck and shocked at the imperial envoy and the third prince's actions of not avoiding others. They also didn't dare make too much noise, so the sounds of drinking and merrymaking in the front yard did not disturb the conversation in the study in the back garden. Xia Qifei was actually very shocked at Fan Xian's arrival. Furthermore, he had come with the third prince. Fan Xian shook his head and said, "Nowadays, everyone in Jiangnan knows of our relationship. I think Jingdo should also know. If that's the case, why are you still trying to hide it?" Xia Qifei glanced at the third prince. Thinking of the rumors on the streets, he didn't avoid them and said straightforwardly, "Commissioner, I'm afraid I've brought you trouble." "What trouble?" Fan Xian gazed at him warmly. you work for the court. It looks like you're doing well recently, but in reality, you've suffered quite a bit. Xia Qifei thought of the brothers who had died that night and his expression darkened slightly. Are your injuries better? Fan Xian asked. Xia Qifei respectfully replied, much better. Fan Xian thought for a moment and then slowly said, you don't have to worry too much. Concerning the Ming family, my attitude is very firm. Perhaps the progress will be a bit slower, but don't think that I have been fooled by someone's attitude. The news of the current master of the Ming family, Ming Qingde, kneeling in the courtyard of the palace treasury manor and fainting after winning the bid had long spread throughout Suzhou and beyond. Thus, as the knife in Fan Xian's hand, what Xia Qifei was most worried about was whether the hand holding the knife would suddenly change its mind. Hearing Fan Xian make a promise, Xia Qifei's spirit rose involuntarily despite his injured body. Revenge and taking back the Ming family was his greatest wish. If he didn't have Fan Xian's help, he would never have been able to do it. Fan Xian looked at his expression and said in a low voice, you work for the court, so the court will support you. To put it more bluntly, since you are my person, I must openly announce this to the world. There is no need to remove this relationship or hide it. In the future, when you work in Jiangnan and send goods to the north, with this layer of influence, it will all be much easier. Xia Qifei's expression appeared to be moved, but he felt a bit terrified in his heart. He didn't know why the commissioner was in such a rush to bring this matter to light. Xia Qifei still thought he was working for the court. He didn't understand that just because Fan Xian used him did not mean that the court used him. To have Xia Qifei send goods to the north and use the Cui family's old route to connect with Fan Xizhe in the north. Under the protection of Fan Xian in the south and the emperor in the north, he would reopen that smuggling route. This was Fan Xian's true goal. Presently, the south had the Overwatch Council secretly managing it, and the north had the provost of the Discipline Commission, Wei Hua. He was both an old acquaintance of Fan Xian and someone the northern Qi emperor trusted. This route was already flawless. The only thing that needed to be hammered a few more times was Xia Qifei himself at the beginning. Fan Xian had come under the guise of discussion. He wanted to use the words of the people to firmly bind Xia Qifei to his side. After today, no matter who it was, no one would believe that Xia Qifei was not Fan Xian's trusted aide. In the future, when the smuggling began, even if Xia Qifei wanted to betray Fan Xian, probably no one would believe him. Furthermore, Fan Xian's enemies would also target Xia Qifei. The Jiangnan restaurant was already a good start. This could only force Xia Qifei to hold Fan Xian even tighter, using external aggression to lock one's heart and tie people onto the boat. The third prince was pestering to get on the boat, but it was impossible for Xia Qifei not to go. The day after tomorrow. Before Fan Xian left the Xia manor, he gave one last order to Xia Qifei. The required procedures should be complete. When the time comes, it will be your turn. Xia Qifei felt slightly excited. Although he knew that the commissioner only needed him to attract the Ming family's attention, he could, in the end, roar his voice in the Suzhou government. It seemed that he was getting closer and closer to his life's goal. However, you also understand. Fan Xian sighed and patted his shoulder. There are no precedents in Qing law for this kind of thing. The other party is the eldest son of the eldest branch. According to the law, he is taking advantage. Even if the council helps, it is unlikely to obtain the desired result. There are many ways to get back what has been lost. Don't be anxious, and don't be overly disappointed. Xia Qifei's heart trembled slightly. He always felt that the young commissioner in front of him was not just talking about the Ming family. Between the upper and lower levels, it seemed that because of the word family property, a certain harmony had been created. He raised his hands in a salute and said, moved, I do not deserve to trouble you because of my matters. You deserve it, Fan Xian said sympathetically. From the beginning, it was made clear that I am also a person who prioritizes profit. Don't be overly concerned. The more he emphasized profit, the more Xia Qifei felt he was sincere. He repeatedly bowed and saw him and the third prince out of the manor. More accurately speaking, Fan Xian and the third prince only stood for a moment in the Xia manor before leaving. The entire process was less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea. However, the attitude and determination they displayed would certainly pass through the mouths of the merchants and officials and reach the ears of the master of the Ming family. After the carriage left the Xia manor, it was not in a hurry to return to Hua Garden. Instead, it headed toward the north of the city. There were many Jianghu heroes in the north of Suzhou, so the guards beside the carriage also became nervous. What day is the day after tomorrow? The third prince opened his innocent and harmless eyes and asked Fan Xian. Fan Xian replied, Xia Qifei will enter the Suzhou government and sue the Ming family for stealing the family property. If you want to know what happens after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 373. On the quiet streets of Suzhou, the clear sound of the carriage wheels drowned out the shocked cry from inside the carriage. The third prince said after a moment of shock, this lawsuit can still be fought. Why not? Fan Xian smiled slightly. Whether or not we can win is another matter, but we must fight. The third prince was, after all, only 9 years old. He was still a child. Hearing of this matter, he became interested and said, Sir, when the time comes, let's go watch the excitement. I heard that Xia Qifei's birth mother was beaten to death alive by the current old Ming matriarch. Fan Xian sighed. This is a family property lawsuit, not an old murder case. It's only about the articles on Qing law and documents. There's no meaning to it. The third prince asked curiously, Sir, there's no guarantee. No. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and shook his head. If there was a guarantee, then why bother with all these tricks? I just hope to drag it out, the longer the better. The third prince sat back down unhappily in his chair and looked at the unfamiliar street scene that passed by. He unconsciously asked, if you're not going back to Hua Garden at this time, where are you going? Fan Xian gazed at him and said, the emperor had you follow me to learn, and you have always been diligent. Since you have come out with me today, I will go along the way to learn something you will definitely need to learn in the future. The third prince didn't know what Fan Xian was talking about. The carriage went from the west side of the city to the north side. It did not enter the place where the men were always circling. Instead, it quietly followed an alley and turned west. Using the cover of the night and the secret vigilance of the members of the Qinian unit behind it, it shook off any possible tailing and disappeared into Suzhou. The carriage stopped outside a private residence. The location was secluded and difficult to notice. Gaudi came down from the driver's seat. His hand grasped the hilt of the long knife on his back. After coldly and carefully observing for a while, he made a fist to signal that it was safe. Only then did Fan Xian lead the third prince's subordinates out of the carriage. The 6th Bureau assassins at Fan Xian's side were all recovering from their injuries. Fan Xian was not willing to let the only 2 people who were unharmed risk their lives again. Thus, their personal safety was completely handed over to the Tiger Guards and the Qinian unit. He acted with increasing caution. Walking along the quiet doorway, the third prince felt a little creeped out. It was dark all around, but he could smell a trace of smoke. This kind of feeling made his hair stand on end. The child unconsciously tightened his grip on Fan Xian's palm. He entered the house and turned into another room. It was a bedroom, and everything was there. There was a big bed and a dressing table. There was even a couple sleeping on the bed. The third prince opened his mouth wide, unable to make a sound for a long time. He thought to himself, what kind of joke is this? Fan Xian was slightly startled. He turned his head to look at the Overwatch Council official leading the way. The official's countenance did not change. He walked straight to the bedside and pulled the hook on the bed frame. With a click, the curtain above the bed was slowly pulled open, revealing a slanting path downwards. He then made a gesture of invitation. As he did all of this, the couple on the bed only moved in a little and did not have any reaction. They didn't even glance at the people by the bedside. It was as if they were blind and deaf. It was also as if Fan Xian and his group were all like ghosts. Fan Xian looked at this scene and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He scratched his head. He kept on feeling that it was like some kind of novel he had read in his previous life. Unexpectedly, it had become reality in front of his eyes. This private residence was a secret residence the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council had placed in Suzhou. At this time, the third prince knew where he had come. Holding Fan Xian's hand, he carefully walked toward the underground tunnel. His heart was beating like a drum. In a trembling voice, he said, "Teacher, although I am a prince, according to the rules of the court, I do not have the right to know about the secret residences of the Overwatch Council." Fan Xian smiled and said, "Every city has 3 to 5 secret residences. It's not like it's something strange. As for the rules, with me here, no one can say anything." He was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. After Chen Pingping's personal letter, he had the absolute power of the Overwatch Council. Hearing Fan Xian say this, the third prince relaxed slightly. Under the contrast of the dim light, he continued to move forward. The 4th Bureau's residence in Suzhou was not the largest, but it was the most secretive. Before long, they came to a secret room. The light in the room was quiet, and the dim light illuminated the somewhat cramped room. There was a charcoal fire in the room, 2 soldering irons, a few boxes of medicine, a few benches, and more than a dozen long and short metal sharp objects of different shapes. It was the standard preparation for extorting a confession. Particularly when paired with the 2 dying and bloody people on the torture rack, it was clear. Fan Xian sniffed this familiar and intimate scent and couldn't help but sniff. He felt the third prince's hand tighten. He couldn't help but smile in his heart. This child did sinister things in the palace in Jingdo, but he was still a child. He had never seen such a slaughterhouse-like scene. The 4th Bureau officials who were extorting confessions had already taken off their clothes because of the heat. They were working with their upper bodies bare. Seeing their superiors suddenly come to the secret residence, they jumped in fright and hurriedly looked around for clothes to wear. Fan Xian waved his hand to stop their movements and said, "Continue working. How are the interrogations coming along?" An official was wearing only one sleeve and wretchedly walked to the table in the corner of the room. He carefully took out a few pieces of paper. They were the results of the extortion. Fan Xian took them and glanced at them. He couldn't help furrowing his brows. It was because he had been thinking about the Juanshan conference that, in order to make good use of time, he had personally come to see the situation of the interrogation. Unexpectedly, a few days had already passed and there was still not much progress. The 2 people who had been captured by the Overwatch Council were the 2 swallow-like assassins who had tried to kill Xia Qifei in front of the Jiangnan restaurant on the night of March 22. That day, these 2 assassins had been poisoned by the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau. They had seen the opportunity quickly and wanted to escape. Unexpectedly, along the way, they had been knocked unconscious by Hai Tang. Afterward, Fan Xian unceremoniously took them and hid them in a secret residence. He tortured and interrogated them. He wanted to know a little inside information about the Juanshan conference. For the Overwatch Council, the Juanshang Conference was truly mysterious. A power that even the Overwatch Council could not grasp made Fan Xian worry. A loosely organized organization. Yet, they could use the second priest of the Qin Temple as a chess piece. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and looked at the results of his subordinates' interrogation. These two assassins were famous killers in the Jiangnan area. Their martial arts were powerful and their actions were sinister. However, it seemed that they did not know much about the Juanshang Conference. They had only been bought by the Ming family with silver to do things. Wake them up. He shook his head helplessly. An official brought a small bottle to the noses of the two people on the rack and had them sniff it. The two of them struggled weakly. Their muscles twisted and fresh blood seeped out of their wounds again. They also woke up. The two assassins forced their eyes open. Terror seeped through their blurred eyes. They had long lost the toughness they had when they were first captured. It looked like they had been tortured badly by the cruel officials of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council these few days. Fan Xian and the third prince sat on the long, not-so-clean bench. Fan Xian flipped through the paper in his hand and quietly asked, "The Serge you speak of, what does he have to do with the Juanshang Conference?" The two assassins knew the Overwatch Council's methods. Since they were not going to be martyrs, they rushed to answer. In a hoarse voice, they roared, "Sir, Serge is the accountant of the Juanshang Conference. As for what exactly he does inside, I truly do not know." Fan Xian raised his head in surprise. "Is Serge not the head housekeeper of the Ming family?" One of the assassins said in a trembling voice, "I have only heard of it once. Concerning the Juanshang Conference, I truly only know this one thing. After enduring for a few days, you two are still quite spirited. It looks like you haven't suffered too much." Fan Xian shook his head. A glimmer of despair flashed through the eyes of the two assassins. The Overwatch Council officials began to use torture again, carrying out this unaesthetic yet repetitive and uninteresting work. Wretched cries rose and fell in the torture room. They were incomparably mournful, but they had no way of reaching the ground. Fan Xian did not cover the third prince's eyes. The third prince looked at this scene. His face was deathly pale, but he forced his head not to turn to the side. He only looked at this bloody scene and suddenly felt the food in his stomach want to rush out of his throat uncontrollably. His chest was extremely depressed. Fan Xian took out a box of ointment from his clothes and used the tip of his index finger to wipe it. He carefully rubbed it under the third prince's nose. In a quiet voice, he said, "I have already reported the matter of the Juanshang Conference to the Emperor. For the other party to be so daring, Your Highness will be able to understand what kind of daring they have. For today's enemies and future enemies, there are some methods we must learn, but we must not revel in them." The third prince knew what Fan Xian was teaching him. On the other side, the fresh flesh on the assassins' chests had already mixed with blood and turned into balls of charred flesh that sizzled on a metal plate. You cannot view using torture and cruel officials as the best way to maintain the rule of the court. You cannot rely on these methods. Even if you weave a wide net, there will still be fish that slip through. Torture and extort confessions, but you still cannot obtain all the information you need, Fan Xian said calmly. The way of governing is to balance leniency and severity. If you believe, then you do not doubt. If you doubt, then you do not use it. Leniency is the foundation. The rest are just small methods to pave the way. The third prince's nose wriggled with a cool smell. He lost some of his malice and understood Fan Xian's meaning. The very different attitudes toward Ming Qingda and Xia Qifei clearly illustrated Fan Xian's method of doing things. If you believe, then you do not doubt. If you doubt, then you do not use it. Coming to watch the execution tonight was to let him understand that not all powerful methods would be effective. It's not bad to be able to get information about the Ming family, Fan Xian comforted his subordinates. Take care of the offerings and heal these two people's wounds. They'll be useful in the future. After leaving the secret residence the fourth bureau of the Overwatch Council had set up in Suzhou, Fan Xian's mood was heavy. At first, he had hoped to be able to find traces of the Juanshang conference. Unexpectedly, he couldn't get anything out of these two assassins. He could only teach the third prince a few things along the way. In reality, it was just to cover up his own helpless awkwardness. Sitting in the carriage on the way back to Hua Garden, he thought carefully. After all, the Overwatch Council was the Emperor's Special Forces organization. There were many things that could not be done openly. Thus, in terms of organization, there were innate limitations. For example, there could not be too many people. Thus, far away in the strategic town of Jiangnan, although it had always been an important area of supervision for the Fourth Bureau, there was still a clear lack of people. If they wanted to investigate such a mysterious organization as the Juanshang Conference, which floated in the clouds, the Overwatch Council's power in Jiangnan was far from enough. At this moment, Fan Xian very much wished that Yan Bingyun could be by his side. However, he also understood that Yan Bingyun was currently in charge of the Fourth Bureau and could not easily leave the capital. Furthermore, he needed Yan Bingyun to help Deng Ziyu with most of the work in the First Bureau. Even if Wang Qinian was here, things might be a lot easier. He sighed. Yang Jimei had not only given Hua Garden to the imperial envoy Fan Xian with both hands, she had also kept the servants, women, and cooks in the garden. After the Overwatch Council's inspection, they confirmed that these people were clean, so Fan Xian did not refuse this good intention. Thus, other than everything close to her, Cici began to enjoy the treatment of a young mistress. Although she was not used to it, there was nothing she could do. The pitiful little girls Fan Xian had bought on his way to Jiangnan also did not have the opportunity to do any rough work. They were truly raised like serving girls in a large family. What was particularly worthy of praise was the chef Yang Jimei had left behind. His standards were so high that it could make the royal chefs in the palace blush with shame. Every day, his 3 meals were cooked in a variety of ways. It made Fan Xian reluctant to go out to taste the delicacies of Jiangnan. He was willing to stay in the garden. Cici liked this chef the most, and the third prince hated him the most. That morning, Fan Xian, Hai Tang, and the third prince were sitting around a small table eating porridge made with old corn, diced ham, and western vegetables. The color of the porridge was not very pretty, but the completely mismatched flavors mixed together made it very delicious and strange. Fan Xian drank 3 bowls in a row. Cici, who was standing to the side, scooped out the porridge in time. At this moment, a few people walked in from outside the yard, accompanied by a tiger guard. They came to the courtyard and looked at Fan Xian and the third prince sitting around the table. They then glanced at Hai Tang and couldn't help but be shocked. Fan Xian looked at the people who had stepped over the threshold and was even more shocked. The people who had come were Sangwen and Deng Ziyu. Sangwen had already come down to Jiangnan to help him. However, what was Deng Ziyu doing in Jiangnan instead of staying together in the capital? When Fan Xian saw clearly the person standing between the two of them, he unconsciously stood up in shock and cried out, "De Bao! Why are you here?" Indeed, the fat man standing carelessly between Sangwen and Deng Ziyu with a dazed expression, looking around fearfully. If it wasn't De Bao, who else could it be? Fan Xian quickly walked forward in fear. He grabbed his brother-in-law's hand with one hand and asked Deng Ziyu, "What's going on? Where's Warner?" Deng Ziyu's expression was tired. He smiled bitterly and said, "Madam's health hasn't been good recently, so she temporarily delayed coming down to Jiangnan. However, this uncle heard that he was coming to see you, so he kept making a fuss at home. The minister sent me to bring this uncle to Jiangnan. Nonsense, Fan Xian sighed. Immediately after, his heart tightened. He asked anxiously, Wanner's health isn't good. Oh, it's nothing. Sang Wen, who had a warm smile on her face and the flesh on her cheeks, replied, the princess has probably caught the wind and is a bit tired. She'll be fine after resting for a few days. She took out 2 letters from her clothes and handed them to Fan Xian. These are letters for you. Fan Xian accepted them and glanced at them. They were written by his father and Wanner. He didn't have time to read them. He first put them in his clothes and said angrily, Father, what do you mean? Jiangnan is in chaos right now. Why did you send Dabao here? Dabao suddenly grinned and pulled on Fan Xian's ear. Little Xian, you hid for so long in this hide-and-seek, you're really good. The third prince, who was holding the bowl of porridge and staring curiously at the door, found that the always scary Fan Xian was actually like this in front of this big idiot. He couldn't resist anymore. With a splutter, he spat out the mouthful of porridge he had been holding in his mouth. Deng Ziyu smiled awkwardly and quickly went forward with Sangwen to bow to the third prince. He didn't dare look at Fan Xian's wretched appearance. Presumably, these two had also been annoyed by Dabao's antics along the way. Since Dabao had come, there would certainly be people to serve him along the way. Cici understood and quickly left the garden to settle those people down. Fan Xian had also finally calmed Dabao down. He first settled him in the back garden and had the little serving girls, who had nothing to do all day, go and eat melon seeds with him. Only now did the front hall quiet down. Haitang rose and bowed slightly. She then left the front hall. She knew that Fan Xian must have a lot to talk about with Deng Ziyu. After Deng Ziyu entered the hall, it was as if he hadn't seen this country girl. Since she had taken the initiative to bow to him, he still had to quickly return the bow. Sitting at the table, Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, Last night, I was thinking that there are indeed few people by my side. It's good that you came, but what about the capital? Sir Yan Jr. is watching over the capital. After receiving the council report you sent back to the capital, the director sent me to bring some people over to help, Deng Ziyu explained. Deng Ziyu explained, also, the thing you wanted to prepare took the second and third corps a few months to complete, so I might as well deliver it to you on my way. Fan Xian shook his head and said, I thought someone else would deliver it. I didn't think it would be you. He glanced at the third prince beside him, who was eating porridge and eavesdropping. He coughed and asked the young master to leave. After the third prince left gloomily, Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, When you came in earlier, why was your expression so strange? Deng Ziyu glanced around and smiled bitterly. When I left the capital, the rumors in Jingdo were too fierce. They all said that you and the northern Qi Saint girl, Haitang, would travel together, sit together, and sleep together. The court couldn't stop discussing it. Furthermore, you are now fixated on the palace treasury, so you have to avoid suspicion. The officials in court were preparing to use this matter to attack you. I didn't think that when I entered Hua Garden today, I would see that girl. Only then did I know that the rumors were true. I couldn't help but worry. Sleep together. Fan Xian smiled coldly. Only those people could think of that. Let's not talk about it. Let me see what you brought. Deng Ziyu carefully took out a flap box from his clothes and handed it to Fan Xian's hand. Fan Xian lifted the lid and carefully examined the piece of paper lying quietly in the middle of the box. The paper was slightly yellowish-white. The edges were slightly curled, and it could be seen that it was quite old. The handwriting on the paper was slightly crooked. It looked like the person who wrote it was near the end of his life. Not bad. Fan Xian furrowed his brows. Although this will still not be of much use, if this family property lawsuit is to be dragged on, we will have to rely on this. Deng Ziyu replied, "Don't worry, the second and third bureau worked together and used countless pieces of the Ming family's previous master's handwriting. They also used old paper that is difficult to find today. In addition to the craftsmanship and attention to detail, no one should be able to tell it is fake. Of course, the Ming family knows it is fake. The real one has long been destroyed," Fan Xian smiled and said. "To pass off the fake as the genuine, there are indeed many professionals in our council. In the future, if we go into the fake antique business, I think we can make a lot of money. Send it to Xia Qifei in a moment. Tomorrow, when the court opens for trial, if this will is thrown there, the Suzhou government will probably be dumbfounded." The investigation into the Ming family continued, but it did not have any results. For one, the Ming family's efforts to wipe away traces was too deep. For another, there were countless connections in the Jiangnan officialdom that protected them. Naturally, the Suzhou government was one of the links. Although Fan Xian could not directly tear down the Suzhou government, using a secret Chenpai's will to make the Jiangnan road officials feel fear and trepidation was still a very easy thing to do. When he was the only one left in the flower hall, Fan Xian took out the 2 letters from his clothes. First, he roughly scanned them and then read them carefully. Warner's letter basically talked about Jingdo matters. Occasionally, it would mention the situation in the palace. However, the language was a bit cryptic. One of the greatest benefits of having a wife in Jingdo was that she could help Fan Xian immediately understand which way the wind in the palace would blow. The eldest princess returned to Guangxin Palace. The second prince quietly returned to the stage. The crown prince's movements were the most secretive. The old Empress Dowager seemed to be dissatisfied with Fan Xian's arrogance in Jiangnan. The strangest thing was that the emperor was still calm. This goddamned emperor, what good was it for him to make the world so chaotic? Where did his confidence come from? Fan Xian sighed. His fingers gently rubbed the fragrant letter. Suddenly, his longing for Warner surged up. After not seeing her for a number of months, he knew that his wife was in Jingdo, worried about him and making plans. After he finished reading his father's letter, Fan Xian finally understood De Bao's purpose in coming to Jiangnan. In the letter, Minister Fan urged Fan Xian to find a time to send De Bao to Wuzhou. After resigning, the Prime Minister, Lin Ruofu, lived in seclusion in Wuzhou. It had been a long time since he had seen his son. If Fan Xian sent De Bao to Wuzhou, he could take the opportunity to visit his scheming father-in-law. This excuse was very good. Even the emperor could not oppose it. Wanli, brother Xiao Jin, the wind blows through the sky, burying love in blood. I'm very happy. Thank you, everyone. I don't know what to say. It seems a little pretentious to ask everyone to spend less money. I can only say, I will still write novels next year. I will still write novels the year after that. I will still write novels the year after that. I will still write novels the year after that. I will also write novels the year after that. The more I write, the better it will be. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.